Good evening and welcome to this evening's study session. Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes one proclamation and one study session item. Members of the public may attend tonight's meeting and future study sessions at the George DeSiero City and County Buildings Council Chambers located at 1 Tacoma Drive, or watch live on Channel 8 and through live streaming on Broomfield's website. Council will be accepting public comment on both items this evening, but it says in person or online, but I don't see CRL. Do we have CRL? Okay, so somebody send me that link, please. So if you're in person, you come up to the podium. If you're online, you'll call 855-695-3744 and press *3 to be placed in the queue for comment. Public comment will be limited to 90 minutes total per item, and the individuals attending in person will speak first. The first 1 through 15 participants in the queue have 3 minutes to speak. The next 16 through 25 have 2 minutes, and if time remains, the next 26 plus participants have 1 minute to speak. For those who wish to make public comment on the enterprise funds discussion item this evening, there's a sign-up sheet in the lobby. But if you didn't get a chance to sign up, you will have to wait until everybody else who signed up spoke. That list, along with the list of those calling in, will be used to determine the order of the speakers. We'll hear from 6 in-person individuals, then 1 caller until we hit these limits. Priority will be given to those who have indicated their Broomfield residence on the sign-up sheet. Non-residents will have a chance to speak if time remains after Broomfield residents have spoken. Many of you have submitted questions or comments prior to the meeting. We appreciate your engagement and understand that you may have additional questions. If you have any specific questions for staff that are not addressed during the presentation, or if questions arise as you're listening to the presentation, please raise those questions during your public comment. Please note, while we're inviting questions, it won't be a back and forth between public and staff to answer them. Rather, staff will be keeping notes of the questions, and what you ask will be providing responses, if possible, after all the public comment has been made during this portion of the study session. Something new, we're trying it out. For our hard of hearing residents present, we have wireless headsets available through the AV team in the back of the council chambers. The first item this evening is a proclamation declaring September 17th through 23rd, 2024 as Constitution Week in the city and county of Broomfield. Representatives from the Front Range chapter of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution are in attendance this evening to accept the proclamation. Will our representatives please come up to the podium? Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf will meet you there. And thank you all for joining us this evening. I'll briefly summarize the proclamation and then I'll turn it over to our representatives from the Daughters of the American Revolution for comments. This proclamation recognizes the privilege and duty of the American people to commemorate the 237th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America, with appropriate ceremonies and activities. Every American shares in this legacy of liberty, and we're grateful for the courage, conviction, and sacrifice of all those who have helped preserve and uphold the principles of a free society. In celebration of the signing of the Constitution and in recognition of the Americans who strive to uphold the duties and responsibilities of citizenship, Congress requests that the week of September 17th through 23rd this year be proclaimed Constitution Week. Therefore, as mayor, I hereby declare and proclaim the week of September 17th through 23rd, 2024 as Constitution Week, and urge all citizens to study the Constitution and reflect on the privilege of being an American with all the rights and responsibilities which that privilege involves. So thank you, honored guests. Would you like to say a few words?
I just want to say on behalf of the Front Range chapter, National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, which has their main meeting housing here in Broomfield. And I am a past regent. We have our regent, Mara Nelson. We have her daughter, Carol Nelson, and we have Jan Maddox, who is a member that's here tonight.
Thank you. Would they like to say anything? No pressure.
We really appreciate your response to this. Not everybody does, and it's, part of our whole thing is patriotism. And so it is important to us. And we thank you for doing this.
It's equally important to us. Thank you. We do allow public comment on all of our items. So if anyone would like to speak to this item, please make your way to the podium. Then I'll go to council members. Any council members? Well, I would just like to say I'm honored to be a prospective member, and I really do value the work that you all do in promoting this event. And I would love to take a group picture with our council if you would like to. Thank you. Our next item this evening is the continuation of a discussion regarding enterprise funds, including a presentation from Broomfield's consultant, AECom. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council and community. I'm going to introduce Public Works Director Ken Rutt in just a moment. But just to recap, this journey started about 4 years ago with Wendy Gap. Director Clark, our finance director, will be up right after AECom in order to walk through those financial slides, including an overview of the Chimney Hollow Wendy Gap bond project. That led into a rate study conversation. We hadn't increased rates since 2012 was the last rate study. Things about a rate study, which it's important to keep in mind, is it's a snapshot. It's not a dynamic model, and it is something that requires consistent and constant updating, which when AECom comes, part of their information from a repeatable process and a model helps us identify the data that we have been collecting historically, but not been able to mine that data into an influential what comes next. So that led us to AECom after that rate study, when we pulled 2 levers. One was from a development perspective on tap fees, and the other was the lever seeking to change consumption behavior. Neither one of those levers were appropriate. We should have increased the base rate, and we didn't. That led into conversations with AECom in order to do a comprehensive overview, not only of the rates, but when you're looking at the rate studies, you have to ensure that the numbers are audited, number one, and number two, the repeatable process that you're looking at the same data consistently. Part of what AECom brings to the table, and they'll talk more about it at their presentation, is consistent monitoring and overview, so we don't find ourselves here again. So part of that structure piece, we will end tonight after AECom, after the finance conversation, and Mr. Rutt will kind of wrap it up and take us home to ensure that we have not only an adequate plan moving forward, but one that council and the community can be assured of as we move forward with I don't want to say periodic updates, but it'd be quarterly updates, much like we do with our public safety as we move forward. And with that, Director Rutt, would you please introduce AECom and the members that are here this evening?
Thank you, Manager Huffman, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council in the community, Ken Rutt, Director of Public Works. As Manager Huffman has outlined, the multiple phase approach taken to ensure a consistent and repeatable and transparent process and analysis. One of the critical actions taken included partnering with AECom to conduct a water utility infrastructure and asset management gap analysis and capital investment planning model. This partnership is an ongoing effort as Public Works moves from a maintenance management model to an asset management. This partnership provides for AECom to audit, confirm, and assist with asset management replacement planning, cost forecasting, not only for today, but for the future, ensuring not only a transparent, but accountable to our community. So here tonight, we have representatives from AECom, and I'll have them introduce their team, and they'll begin their presentation.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Council, for having us. My name is Bridget Malinowski. I am the Asset Management Practice Lead for AECom in the U.S. With me today, I have James Roberts, who is local here in Denver and helping, or Broomfield, and helping us with this. We've got Dr. Bob Peskin, who will be speaking here in just a moment once I give you some background, and then Tony DeVito, who is also here with us. So as we get into this, if you could go to the next slide, I'd just like to talk about the history, talk about really where we are in asset management. The country is behind where the rest of the world is. Australia is leaps and bounds ahead of us in asset management. One of the things that started in the countries in the 50s, we started building a lot of infrastructure. And as those times went on, we continue to build and we continue to grow. And we haven't spent a lot of attention to our maintenance and operations. So as our cities and infrastructure grow, we need to build up our staff that address that infrastructure and our budgets that help us maintain those. One of the things, and a lot of agencies have struggled with, spending money on things that don't give them that shiny new toy, that don't give them that new thing they can look at. And so what happened was first, the Federal Transit Administration came out in 2016 and said everybody needs to have a transit asset management plan. And I bring this up just because they were the first ones to require that. So now transit agencies across the country have a requirement to spend money to actually look at a plan and look at what they're doing with asset management. Shortly following that, the Federal Highway Administration and the EPA also came up with a plan that said all of the state DOTs. So this just is at the state level. This didn't trickle down. We're starting to see that trickle down come in, but basically they're saying, hey, we need to start paying attention to what we have out there, the infrastructure that we have, and we need to start setting funds aside so that we can start repairing the infrastructure that's there. Next slide. You heard Ken talk a little bit, if you click on the next one, you heard Ken talk a little bit about maintenance management and moving from that to asset management. And really what we're talking about is when you're in maintenance management, you're really looking at what you're doing the next couple of years. What's my budget for the next 3 years? What am I spending my money on? I've got some critical infrastructure here that needs some help. Really looking at just the dollars that I have. I have a funding bucket that maybe has a year on it, maybe has 2 years on it. When you move into asset management, you're starting to look at 20 years, at 30 years, at 50-year cycles of your assets, and really starting to take a look at the life cycle. And in some agencies, we're even looking at 75 and 100 years, because that's sometimes the life cycle of your assets that you have there. You're starting to look, when you're doing asset management, at more really what are their economic costs, not just what do I need to repair, but really what are the economic functions of it, whether it's the political costs or the sustainability, resiliency, those types of costs that go into it. And in maintenance, you're also just looking at your priorities. my high priority now and what's my high risk right now. When you're really looking at an asset management system, you're looking at the whole spectrum of everything that's there. We're breaking down those silos to stop when we go to different agencies, we're stopping to look at just what's happening to my water, what's just happening to my roads, but starting to pull all of that together. So you're looking at the whole system and the whole community. The next slide. So this shows just a life cycle planning process and where you are. As you're in the infancy of asset management, you start on having that asset data. And Broomfield really has a good handle on the asset data for your water assets. Having that, what the cost of the assets were when they were put in place, the condition, the age. Where you need to go is really starting to look at those deterioration curves, not just relying on, well, they're supposed to last this long. Well, how long are they really lasting in Broomfield? What are some environmental impacts that may be changing the life of your assets? What are some of the impacts of capacity growth and those types of things that may be changing the life of your assets? Then you move into really the diagnostic. Why did it happen? So really looking at your service levels for your customers and what the specific needs are for utilization and reliability. And these factors should be applied to all of your assets. Then as you get more mature with that, you're really looking at asset knowledge. This is where you can start to be predictive. What will happen next? And that's where you guys have taken the first good step of taking that evaluation, doing the gap analysis, seeing what condition everything is in as far as the data and the information that you have, and starting to look at programming it out and what funds do you need going forward to eliminate that backlog. And then really when we get into the optimization, and what do we mean by optimization? Optimization is saying, where's the best place to spend my dollar? Not just, I'm going to spend it on this one asset, but you want to take a look at if you're going to go through and replace a water line that goes across the street. You don't want to have just replace that street and then the next year go in and cut that open. So that's really what you're looking at, optimization, not prioritization, just looking at what's important to fix today and each year and in each individual asset type, but really looking at that prioritization. So really, this is where the whole country is moving. It's not, you're not alone in this journey. We're seeing this across the country. Everybody's moving to that way. Some people are moving faster than others, but we're all moving to get there because it's really important. I mean, you see it across with all the infrastructure issues that we've had throughout the country. So the next slide shows really what are some of the benefits of asset management. You have improved financial performance. Yes, you have to spend money, but you spend money to save money, because when you're looking at what's the best use of the money, you start looking at really not spending money on something that you shouldn't be. We like to talk about roads a lot of times. Nobody likes to see a road in bad shape, but sometimes once a road gets so bad, you want to leave it that way because it's not going to get any worse. You start looking at preserving the good stuff that you have, because if you can preserve the good things, just like with your car, you take care of your car, you change your oil, you wash the car after all the salt spray from the winter, you do those types of things to preserve your car. If you don't do that, your car's going to last, but is it going to last as long and in as good a condition as you'd like it to be? Informed asset investment decisions. So this is what we talked about with really having that data-driven model so you can make those decisions, and you can make those decisions consistently year after year. Really making sure that you have a consistent condition ratings and those types of things really help to fund that in. Plus, if you've got a process that you're following every time, you can repeat that process, whether it's us doing it, whether it's you doing it, somebody else comes in and looks at, they can come up with the same answer time and time again. It helps you manage risk. That is one of the things that Dr. Peskin's going to talk about when he comes up here. Really looking at managing risk, looking at what are those critical assets that need to be looked at and repaired in a timely fashion. So you can help reduce or avoid some of those critical failures. Improve service and outputs, demonstrated environmental and social responsibility. Compliance, we do anticipate that some of those federal mandates that have been set at the state level are going to start coming down. Enhanced reputation, improved sustainability and efficiency and effectiveness. So then the next slide just talks about asset management. It needs a framework. You want to have a framework. This comes in the consistency so you can repeat it over and over. If you don't have a framework up in the top right, it's just kind of a jumbled, you hit one piece at one time and another at another time. But we want to pull you into a good framework so you're having a repeatable process that you're looking at. And so what we did with the next, if you move to the next slide, is we have a 4 pillars framework that really pulls together all the asset management body of knowledge. There's a whole 17,000 pages of guidebooks that are out there that you follow. And that's what helped guide us as we went through the gap analysis that we'll talk here in a minute. It's our 4 pillars process. It looks at organizational, making sure you have the business processes in place to implement the asset management program that you're putting in. Looking at the data, we spend 80% of our time and effort in the data, whether it's collecting condition information, tracking the data, doing that, and then the technology is the last pillar. So we pull all that together to do a good framework. The other thing we do is on the next slide is really looking at getting support from the community, not just your community, Broomfield community, but also looking at what others are doing. So there is an asset management user group that you guys are a part of. And I think it's great because you can reach out to those other communities to see what they're doing, to see what kind of troubles and challenges they have and how they're progressing in their asset management journey. And then, when you bring on software, it helps because, hey, I'm trying to get the software to do this. And what have you had success with in that sort of thing? So this is just a high level background of asset management. When we go into the next slide, we'll actually talk about what we did for Broomfield and looking at the gap analysis. So on the next slide, it's the scope. We really looked at the water asset management framework. So we really looked at water, wastewater, and stormwater. We used the 4-pillar process and framework to really evaluate what condition the data was in. Sometimes I've gone into people and they say, oh yeah, we've got digital data and it's just a PDF set of plans. And that's not the case with you guys. PDF it's digital, but you can't really do a lot with that data. You guys have a really good set of water data. We were able to pull it and look at it. I will say there's definitely opportunities for improvements, and that's really getting it into a single place. I think we had something like 17 or 18 different documents that had the different data in it, and pulling that together to put it in the model. Just takes some time, but once you guys continue on this journey and go to put your asset management program in place, I think that you'll be in a really good spot there. And so we looked at all of that. Came up with an evaluation for you, and then also ran all of that information through our capital investment planning model. And Dr. Peskin will talk about that here in a minute. So the next slide is the assessment process that we do for the gap analysis. One more slide. Really what we do is we do a document review. We had over 35 different documents that we reviewed for business processes and maintenance, how you do maintenance, and how what your data looks like. We had 5 different workshops. We had nearly a dozen staff members involved, and over 2 months, a lot of Q&A back and forth. It's saying, hey, we found this. Can you give us some information? Looking at your guys' website, your publicly available information as well, just to see how that all goes through. We look at that, we compare it, and then we come up with maturity scores, which I'll explain in just a minute. Come up with the recommendations and implementation plan, which basically results in a roadmap. This roadmap is done with a consensus building workshop. So that way it's a realistic roadmap that sets the bar high for you, but is achievable. We don't want to set it so high that you just put the roadmap on the shelf and you don't implement it. So if you go to the next slide, that just gives you, this shows really the maturity scoring that we used. And this is from the Institute of Asset Management. At the far left is the 0 or an innocent. And what that means is you had no idea about what that is. You guys brought us in, so you really you don't score really 0 on anything. You go through aware as a maturity level 1, developing is 2, 3 is competent, and really 3 is where everybody wants to be. What that means is you say what you do and you do what you say. So if you say you have a process for you, do you have that process documented, and are you following it? So really that's where you want to be. For me as an engineer, I'm like 3 seems average to me. I want to be higher than that, but it really is a good spot. When you're over in the optimizing and excellent, that's when you're leading the areas, leading your peers, and really you should start talking to them. And that's where you can do that knowledge to share, where you find out where you have the opportunities to learn more from them and you can share some of those pieces with them. When we go into the radar diagram, they are somewhat subjective still, because I will tell you, we want to do this in concert and collaboration with you. We want to have something that really reflects what you're doing. And you will find the more mature you get with asset management, the higher you set your own bar. So you may still have some of the similar scores 10 years from now, but your bar is set a lot higher because you expect more of yourself as you go into that. So if you go to the next slide, that is a radar diagram. Basically, all the 40 elements that we reviewed with your staff to see how you fit into that. You don't need to read this from the audience. The closer you are to the center, the closer you are to that 0. The further you get from the center, the far outer edges are the 5s. So this just kind of gives you an idea of kind of where you fall in. Now we can compare those to other agencies and kind of look at that. What we look at that is opportunities for improvement. Where do you have opportunities where you can do some good things and improve that and make it even better? And then we break it down in each of the quadrants by each of the 4 pillars that we kind of talked about earlier. The next slide, and you guys have received the roadmap in the previous submittal that you have. But basically, it's just a roadmap that over the next 5 years, how can you raise those scores? What can you do to bring those scores up and continue to improve and mature on your journey of asset management? So this is something, it is important to do a consensus building workshop to make sure that those are realistic goals. And it's something, if we say you need to hire somebody and you take a year to hire somebody, we want to say that they need to be hired in 6 months. We want to say, hey, your process is, it takes you a year because you have to budget them. And then the second year is when you actually bring them on. So those types of things, that's why we want to do that consensus building workshop. And this is one of those things that you actually want to reevaluate every year, because we know priorities change. Things come up and you have to reallocate resources to do some different items and maybe not focus on some of those. You may say, hey, let's just focus on a couple of these low hanging fruit ones and get those knocked out. But you definitely want to reevaluate it every year and see how you're progressing and what the new priorities are and keep that moving. So that's a really high level overview of the gap analysis report that we submitted. The next slide is where we go into the capital investment model, and Dr. Peskin will talk to that.
My name's Bob Peskin with AECOM. What I'll be talking about is the analytical platform that we used to take your data and project out what your future needs are going to be and what the implications are at different funding levels. That's the fundamental question that we were addressing. Next slide, please. The tool was an off-the-shelf tool that we had developed for other clients and have applied in a variety of contexts at a variety of scales. And the scale that we applied it here is very similar to how we've applied it elsewhere. It's intended to address 3 fundamental questions. First question is, how big is the backlog right now? What assets are already beyond their useful life, and what's the dollar replacement or investment need for those assets that are already beyond their useful life? The second is to look to what the future needs are going to be. So we age the assets over time, and I'll talk about this in some subsequent slides. We age the assets over time and year by year identify what assets now reach the end of their useful life and what's the dollar investment required to renew or replace them. And then the final question is what happens if we don't fully fund the current backlog and the future needs? What happens to asset performance? What happens to asset condition, to the backlog, and to operating costs? Most of the questions here that we're dealing with are more on the capital side, long-term investments, but there's an outcome on the operating side in terms of the needs for preventive or scheduled maintenance and for unscheduled or reactive maintenance. I'll be very upfront. The tool in some ways is rudimentary. It's dealing with the assets, asset by asset. It's dealing with a relatively small number of facts. It does not address certain operational realities. So if you can't do A before B, or you can't do B and C simultaneously, because if you did, you couldn't pump water. We're not directly addressing those types of realities. So it's more of a very asset by asset analysis, and therefore it's not project oriented. It's very detailed asset oriented. So sequencing is a real world issue, and we're the first to admit we're not addressing it quite at that level of detail. The tool runs very quickly though, and it allows us to run multiple scenarios very fast. All the slides that I'm going to show you, if you pay attention to the dates and times, I did all of this one afternoon. Took months to assemble the data, but running the analyses actually took place relatively quickly. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about the prioritization, talk about how this analytical platform works and what it is that we did with your data. Next slide. All right, so this is an animation, so I'm just going to indicate when to click ahead. So click. So we begin with an asset inventory. So we had an inventory of several thousand assets, data, off-the-shelf data that the city provided to us. Next slide, or click again. And we take those assets and age them year by year. And each year we identify the assets that have already reached the end of their useful life. And we set them in priority order. And I'll talk about how the prioritization works in the next slide. Click again. And then we apply a funding constraint. And we spend the money in priority order until the money runs out. Click again. And those projects get funded. But you'll note that some projects didn't get funded. Projects 4 and 5 did not get funded because we didn't have enough money in this scenario. Click again. And we keep track of a set of performance measures, which we'll show you graphically in subsequent slides. Click again. Meanwhile, the model continues to age the assets in the subsequent year. It finds the assets in the second year that have reached the end of their useful life. It sets them in priority order. But remember that we had some assets in the first year that didn't get funded. So they get carried forward and applied. Click again, please. And one more time. And we see that some of those assets from the first year end up displacing some of the assets in the second year. Click again. We apply the funding constraint again, spend the money in priority order until the money runs out. Click again. Keep track of some statistics, but you'll notice that again, some assets didn't get funded because of this funding constraint. So we carry them forward. And this cascading calculation continues over the length of the analysis. The analyses that we ran for you were for 20 years. We could run them for 30 years or 50 years, in any subsequent analysis. Next slide. Next slide again. Okay. The prioritization process, the tool itself is set up to consider 4 factors, of which we've so far only used one. And the one that we used was we prioritize based on asset condition and age. And that's a rudimentary approach. It works for the purposes of an initial analysis, but there are certainly enhancements that we can do to that analysis process. And the one that's probably the most important is addressing risk. And we quantify risk in this context in terms of the probability of failure times the consequence of failure. Probability of failure is based on a set of age versus reliability decay curves that we have for various classes of assets. And the consequence of failure in the context of water and sewer assets would be the number of water and sewer taps affected by a failure of the assets. We haven't quite gotten to that point yet because we wasn't available to us when we did our initial work. We didn't have a comprehensive summary of the taps associated with each asset. And this is easiest to think about in terms of the water main supply pipelines and the sewer collection pipelines. Ultimately, at the block level, each individual household has a tap. And then those come together in branches and into the main, collecting more and more households. A failure at the block level affects relatively few households. A 24-inch water main is going to affect a lot more households. We're not quite yet at that level. It's certainly a goal for us. Another measure that we didn't address, but we could address if we had better information on the operating side is what's the operating impact of aging assets? As the condition of the assets decline, we would expect that corrective maintenance would need to be more frequent and reactive maintenance or unscheduled maintenance, that would also be more expensive. And then finally, and this happens particularly for asset owners that are pretty far along in the asset maturity scale, coming up with a strategic goals rating associated with, typically this is done by class of assets. So scoring assets in the context of considerations of response to regulatory demands or how customers are served. And then all this is combined in a sort of a classic weighting and rating score. Next slide. The data, the cost that we use is largely off-the-shelf cost, most of it provided by the city. We supplemented some of those costs. Next slide. So now I'm going to show you some of the results. Next slide. Wanted to point out that we addressed nearly, well, more than 9,000 asset line items, and you can see the various categories. This is largely as the data was provided to us by your staff. Next slide. We divide up the analysis into water and sewer assets, and within each of those into public works and utilities assets. Here you see the types of assets that we're talking about at the finer level of detail. Next slide. So now I'm going to show some of the results of the water analysis. So water supply. We're going to show a set of 3 graphs in each of these slides. The upper left graph is showing the backlog, that is the dollar value of assets that are beyond their useful life. The lower left is showing the condition of the assets. 5 is new, 1 means the assets are ready to be, are essentially right at the threshold of not being safe to use. 2.5 is the threshold for useful life. And then the lower right graph is showing the percentage of assets that are within their useful life. So this is water assets funding at $2 million a year. We looked at funding levels just to see what would happen to the backlog at alternative funding levels. So this is $2 million a year. Click one slide. This is doubling the funding. You'll notice that the backlog is cut about in half, and a small increase in the condition of the assets. Click again. This is at, next slide, at $6 million a year. $6 million a year, we take care of the backlog, not just long-term, but even in the near term, we take care of the backlog. What's the right funding level? Looks like it's between 4 and 6 million a year for water assets. This takes care of year by year issues and also prepares us for the relatively large need for the end of the analysis period, which is for the water treatment plant. So these are the water assets. Next slide. And those were what we call performance measures. Now I'm going to show you spending measures, essentially how the money was spent in these scenarios, both on the capital side and on the operating side. So at $2 million a year, we're spending relatively little on the capital side, and we can see a growth in operating costs. The reason for operating costs growing is the average age of the assets is going up, the average condition of the assets is going down. So we're spending more money, we're spending more money because of more frequent scheduled or preventive maintenance, and spending more money for reactive or corrective maintenance. Click the slide one more time. Here we're spending twice as much money on capital. We see a relatively modest improvement on the operating side. And then at $6 million a year, which completely takes care of the backlog, click again. And we spent a lot of money, particularly at the tail end of the analysis. That was the money spent on the water treatment plant downstream. And when that happens, we see a marked decrease in operating costs. And that's because the water treatment plant is relatively expensive to operate and is very sensitive to the condition of the assets. Okay, so that's the water analysis. Next, we'll talk about the sewer analysis and begin with the performance measures. So here, we started at $6 million a year, and we see the backlog growing quite significantly at $6 million a year. And then we click again, we go to 8 million a year, we cut the backlog by more than half, going to 8 million a year, and then click again at 10 million a year. We got rid of the backlog by 2032, but it comes back again right at the very end of the analysis. And then I think we have one more scenario at 12 million a year. We get rid of the long-term backlog completely and we bring the backlog to zero several years earlier at the front end of the analysis. So those are the performance measures. And then we have a set of slides on the spending measures. Next slide. Click again. So here's the $2 million scenario. And again, flat capital spending, but we see a growth in operating costs. Click again at 8 million a year, spending a bit more on capital, not too much change on the operating side. Click again at 10 million a year, and then the next slide at 12 million a year. Again, not too much of an impact on the operating side for sewer. The big operating impact is on the water, for the water assets. Okay, click again. What all this tells us is that if we're assuming flat funding, same amount in each year in today's dollars, in 2024 dollars, for water on the order of 6 million a year, probably between 4 and 6 million a year, and for sewer between $8 and $10 million a year. And this again is to avoid the long-term growth in backlog and the long-term growth in operating costs on the water side. Next slide. Okay, so I think at this point, Bridget, you're going to talk about next steps.
So I think going into next steps is really looking at how you're moving forward and what do we need to do. We definitely need to take a look at incorporating risk in this, doing a gap analysis on the rest of your assets. So that way we can start looking at getting to that long-term goal of optimization, improving data quality. Definitely, you've got some good data out there, but there's some room for improvement, like I talked about before, and then implementing an asset management system. And really what all of this is going to help you do is really operate like a business. That's really what you want to do, because you want to make sure that you've got funds coming in that are going to take care of the assets that you're working on, and as you grow and expand. The one thing to what we did is we did not account for any growth or capacity improvements that are in there. It's really just looking at your assets where they are today. So those are, that's the summary of the gap analysis and the capital investment planning program that we put together for you. I think the next slide is just questions, or thank you.
Next up is Finance Director Graham Clark, who's going to connect the data and information that was provided by AECom into how did we get to the rates that we're recommending now based on the data from AECom, and how do we ensure moving forward that we don't have a repeat performance of surprises, and or we're making intentional decisions on what to be funded and what isn't going to be funded and what will be pushed based on the level of funding. Mr. Clark.
Thanks, Graham Clark, Finance Director, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. Thank you for the time this evening. Next slide. The first thing we'll talk about is Windy Gap. Councilmember Lim had some questions about this particular thing. This year, as part of the Windy Gap Chimney Hollow project completion, the project had cost overruns of about 10%. This totaled $65 million total for all allottees, and the Broomfield portion is 29% of the project, which is about $18.9 million. The anticipated amount in last year's CIP was $11.4 million, and that was intended to be cash funded on the 2024 CIP, but the cost overruns ended up being 18.9, which was not feasible to be paid in cash any longer. Next slide. However, the group did get a good interest rate as part of the group financing at 2.08%. We're waiting to hear from Northern on the next steps of this agreement, but annual payments would begin in 2025. Next slide. One key item to mention is that the 18.9 does not go onto Broomfield's books as bond debt. It's different from Broomfield's own bond debt. It's not taking out a loan for this Windy Gap amount, but we are obligated to pay the pro rata share of 29.4%. So I wanted to touch on that because that certainly that was certainly a part of the 2025 CIP and worth noting. Next slide. This next slide is one that you've seen before, but moving on from the Windy Gap into this Front Range comparison, we have updated all the surrounding communities with the updated 2025 rates. You can see that in light blue is the additional amount from each of the communities that will be raising rates. The only one we did not hear from was Erie, which have not made theirs public yet. But you can see Broomfield is still on the bottom half, even after the increase in rates. That was anticipated in July. We knew that these other entities would be raising their rates, and it's held true that we're still on the bottom half of all the Front Range communities. Obviously, this doesn't include all the communities. Councilmember Cohen asked for a few more communities to be added, which we'll show at the end of the slides. Next slide. So here's a sunburst chart. These were shown at the public forums the last couple weeks, but it's pretty interesting. On the inside, you can see revenues like the license fees at 73%. You can see usage, and then the base rate right now is very small. You can see that in purple. In 2022, after the last rate study, the rate tiers were implemented. That's the orange piece there on the one on the left. The tiers, which is a very common utility structure, were implemented to encourage conservation through price signaling. And in addition to the tiers, after the last rate study, Broomfield significantly increased license fees to the developers, which you can see in the teal there. Through external factors such as the interest rates, most development came to a screeching halt in 2023 and so far in 2024. And both of the previous measures, the usage and the license fees, did not yield what we needed it to in terms of generating revenue. The revised rate structure, which is on the right, aims to better diversify the rate revenue, which is base rates, and you'll see that it includes better rate stabilization as we head into the future. And that's the one on the right, and you can see it's almost equal with license fees, base fees, and usage. The outside of this particular chart is what that goes to in terms of expenditures. So it's kind of matching up. For instance, the CIP growth of 62 million is very similar to the license fees. Next slide. So similar to the previous slide, sewer and the proposed stormwater are already structured to have a majority of the revenue coming from the base fee, which is appropriate. So this is the same thing only for sewer and stormwater. These already have pretty decent rate stabilization, and especially with the stormwater, that's a flat fee, so it's very easy to anticipate what kind of revenue will be generated from stormwater fees. Next slide. So through our ongoing and repeatable process that we've started the last couple of years, projected revenues, expenditures, and fund balances have been updated since we last presented this in July. You can see the last column, 2029. The ending fund balance is negative. This highlights the fact that there are very large items in the 5-year CIP, and we're looking several years out into the future. So not approving this rate increase will make running the enterprise considerably more difficult as we head into the future. Next slide. Similarly, for the sewer fund, this is the financial projections that we're looking out into the future. We're really looking to put Broomfield Financials in a good financial position as we move forward. Every year, as part of the annual budget development cycle, we will be looking at all the different variables and analyzing it each year and coming back with different rate proposals. There are many variables that go into this evaluation each year. Precipitation, water usage from residents, development, and CIP needs, which are constantly changing, are all items that are very important variables that go into our plan for 5 years. Next slide. So as a reminder, this is the single family, which was presented earlier this summer with the $20 increase in water, $9 in sewer, and $11 in stormwater. About $4 of both the water and the sewer is the increased amount that we've budgeted based on AECom's recommendations. Next slide. One thing to note for multifamily dwelling units, they're charged the same base rate as single family homes, but they're not charged a usage rate in tiers, but they're charged $2.55 for all their usage. That's just one common delineation between multifamily and single family. Next slide. A potential short-term option is before you tonight. Council could elect to essentially use general fund property tax dollars in the short term and do a $5 rate reduction for the next few years, though a decision would likely be made 1 year at a time in the budget process. In addition, any external funds will reduce the share the general fund contributes to the enterprise fund so as to maintain that 7% or less. It's very important that we stay 10% or less for the enterprise fund, but we really don't want to get close to the 10%, right? We want a buffer there. And so the 7% is what we have before you tonight. If council chooses to proceed with this option, additional steps would be needed. If given this direction, staff would prepare a budget revision to account for a $2.3 million, $2.24 million general fund transfer from the general fund into the water fund. And this revision would not be on the October 1st first reading date, but it would be ready for the second reading, which is October 22nd. Next slide. Here you can see what that reduction looks like on the bills. On that first line of the table, the water base fee, instead of a $19.97, it's $14.97. If we go this route, there'd be a reduction in available general fund dollars in the future. In 2024, we have held back the additional property tax because of the unknown legislative changes that happened in the last couple weeks. Some of the additional property tax, however, has been collected and set aside for partial cash funding for the police and court building in 2026. Next slide. The $5 reduction would be for all residential, including multifamily. However, the proposal does not include the commercial customer class. It's only residential. Next slide. Lastly, if council selects this option, this is where Broomfield would be in the comparison of Front Range communities. We've got, I think, 11 or 12 on here. As I mentioned, we've added about 3. Curtis, if you can bring up that additional slide. We've added Castle Rock, Loveland, and Longmont. Loveland and Longmont are currently more expensive than Broomfield's proposal, and Castle Rock is slightly less expensive. The reason we didn't add a bunch more is due to the noisiness of the slides, but we could get really a plethora of all the Front Range communities if desired. But you can see that Broomfield is still on the lower half even after our increase. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. We're going to begin with public comments. So thank you all for the wealth of knowledge. We're going to proceed with public comments, which will be limited to 90 minutes total per item. We did have a sign-up sheet in the lobby, and that list, along with a list of those calling in, don't see anyone, will be used to determine the order of the speakers. We'll hear from 6 in-person individuals, then 1 on the phone until we hit the limits. I don't think we will. We'll see. I don't have a lot of folks signed up. I have 6 folks so far. So we'll go to those people first. When I call your name, please come to the podium, state your name and neighborhood for the record. And if you have any specific questions for staff, please use this public comment time to ask them. Our staff will be keeping notes of your questions and will respond when all the public comment is completed. So first we have Roxy Jewell, Susie Gallant, John Ewalt, then Jan Billsborough, Rick Fernandez, and Pat Quinn.
Good evening, Roxy Jewell, Lockmore. I've been here a long time, long before we became a county. Shortly after we became a county, I started complaining that the county needed to be run as a business instead of a plaything. We no longer could we call upon the other counties to cover stuff because we wanted to be a county. It wasn't heeded on anything that I said. Now we're in trouble. But even this council and the city management has not taken care of problems. Now we don't have a choice. One of my questions is I know everything has to go up. Nice that the water bill didn't, the base rate didn't double on me by at least a few cents, but it still doubled. So my water bill's still gonna double. It's not gonna be just 50% more. It's gonna be doubled. So my question is I want to know, and you guys already know because you got a group here that is helping you with your financials and everything. I want to know what average percentage rate is all of these bills going to keep going up every year? Because we did this just last year. We did it actually 2 years ago. It was being talked about and stuff. Then it went up and then it went up again. And now we're going up a big shot. So are you going to go ahead and raise it 10 or 20% more next year and then a year after that? Because I'm already here on a 5-year program here. And this is a business. So you need to let, quote, quote, your customers of your business know how much you're going to gouge them for. Things weren't taken care of before. It does need to be taken care of now. I understand that. Everything wears. There's an old saying, everything's made by man, so sooner or later it will break. So we have to fix things. You got to have money in a pocket to do it. So I want to know how much money it's going to go up. Hopefully I can live through it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Susie Gallant. I was not here last week. Or the last meeting, I chose to watch the debate. I wish I would have come here instead, but one of the things that transpired is that you approved the trash. And it was really particularly sad to me because my neighbor who's 84 and he has his issues, he came to me and he said, can we share trash bag cans? I want to cancel mine. I can't afford it. And I read now that you've taken our rights away to shop around and try to get the best deal we can. And I look at my neighbor and I think he has his rights have been taken away. And I don't think you really thought this through about the seniors, the challenged people, all the way around, and the basic, our right to choose who we want to use for our trash service. So that's one thing. The other thing that sort of struck me was that the justification was the wear and tear on our streets from these terrible trucks, so many of them, is going to tear our streets up. So we're going to save a lot of money by not having all of them. Well, that kind of struck me as odd since I was here the last time when you decided on the building or rebuilding of the swimming pool. And I brought up, what is this trucks coming down with concrete in them every 20 minutes is going to do do to our streets and our homes? Crickets. So how can you have it both ways? I understand your positions. I understand you're probably doing this in the best way you can. But from my perspective, all I see is it's going up and up and up. Property taxes going up. The water rates are going up. If we don't like the trash or whatever, they're going to go up. We don't have the ability to negotiate with the trash company and maybe, use our methods. So I'm disappointed. And I see every time I come, I don't see where are you saving money for us? Where are the taxes going down for us? Where are the costs going down for us? Can't keep going up and up and up because who can sustain this? Eventually you're going to totally shoot your foot off because there won't be anyone around to be able to fulfill all of these projects as well-meaning as they are. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Hi, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. John Ewalt, Pinnacle North. Originally came here with questions on two subjects. One's been addressed, and I have a whole bunch more questions based on what was presented. So on the first question, or first subject of questions, can staff identify by name or position who is going to own the enterprise funds going forward, and who will ensure they are maintained properly? And has a succession plan been identified? So if that person or persons leave, that someone is there to take it over and make sure that this isn't dropped on the floor again. And with that, how will this information be presented to council and the public on an ongoing basis? This seems clear that the reason we're in this state is because the enterprise funds were being ignored and they weren't causing a problem, so no one was looking at it. We can't let that happen again. This needs to be something that is reported on and owned by someone by name, so we don't forget where this money is going to. Then I really appreciate that representatives from AECom were here. Going over the slides made a lot more sense now, but I still have some questions on that. First of all, how is the plan that is being presented going to be evaluated if and when we pursue this? Is this on a yearly basis? We're going to go back and look at it and say, yeah, we're tracking pretty well, or wow, something's way off and we need to reevaluate it and replan. That would be very interesting to understand. And then with the numbers that were shown, the $2, $4, $6 million, is that the total outlay per year in capital expenses? It's really hard to understand if that's extra funding that needs to be added in, or if that's the actual, that is the cap that we would be spending every year. And then I'll get back to that in a second, why I would find that super interesting. And then it was mentioned that there was workshops for employee interviews. And I would just wonder if managers were present in those interviews or in those workshops, because I found that oftentimes the person out at the end running the shovel knows an awful lot about what's going on and where the problems are in the system. And if managers are present, they may not be willing to actually describe the problems that they're seeing. And so that would be interesting to know as well. With the storm sewer, we have a new enterprise fund for that. Does that go into the sewer data that AECom presented, or is that something else that needs to be looked at? And then as far as I'm running out of time, so I'll just hit this question. The $5 reduction in the base rate for water, why is it only on water? We have multiple funds. Each one has their own 10% limit. It seems reasonable we should be looking at every one of those funds, not just water. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, and city manager. My name is Jan Bill Sparrow. I'm a resident of the Red Leaf neighborhood in Ward 4. I truly appreciate the opportunity to ask questions tonight. I know this is a first in a study session, so I want to thank you for that. I'm also grateful for the information Mr. Clark shared of the water projection and the sewer projection, looking at 2024 figures and then going forward. The challenge for me and what I'd like to bring to your attention is the difficulty in working with all the various documents that we have on a financial basis and pulling them together in a manner that provides enough meaning, I would expect, for you all, and certainly for those of us that are citizens. So when I look at the budget document related to the enterprise funds, and I look at table 1D, pages 1 and 2 for the water fund, sewer fund, water reclamation fund, and I look at the public works budget on page 135, I see figures, but not a full picture. And I would request that you consider a full picture of financials, beginning balance, revenues, expenditures, ending balance, and include in that some real specificity about what the rate increase is providing for citizens. When we look also at the actuals for 2023, I'm not able to tie them out to the audited financial reports for 2023. I know you have two systems and that makes it challenging, but we should be able to track all of that consistently across. And so when I look at actuals for 2023 for all enterprise funds, it's at 77 million. I see that increasing to 118 million as an estimate for this year. And that is a significant increase. We'd like to know what exactly is in that. How much is Windy Gap? How much is tanks? How much are other major pieces, as well as the operation and maintenance? Another question relates to the dollar amount for operating funds as a reserve. So when I look at the audited amount of 43 million, that's significantly different from the innards I've seen in little bits and pieces here and there for the reserve for the operations for the water fund. I could go further, but I see I'm running out. I've got about 11 seconds to finish up, and I think I may have to leave it there, but a request that we get some more information on all of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem and Council and City staff. My name is Rick Fernandez and I'm from Broomfield Heights neighborhood. Quick comment on Constitution Day. Thank you for recognizing that. I have another reason to celebrate that. My dad's birthday is today, so I just want to say happy birthday to my dad. A couple things that I wanted to take away. First of all, thank you, AECOM, for coming in and speaking. I look at that and say, boy, that would have been a great topic for the council to focus on in your focus session back in March. Great opportunity to do that because I think the public would be better educated on what's going on. I think you would be better armed with where you're at if you would have actually treated that as a focus back in March. One of the questions I did have, which was related to the change in the base rate, which I'm not going to call a reduction, but to know that that did come from a property tax basically transfer from the general fund was a good step in the right direction. I'm glad to hear that. I do find it interesting that you're calling it a reduction. Congress does this all the time. The fee's still going up 43%. Calling it a reduction and saying, hey, it's a reduction is like doing, you know what, on my shoes and telling me it's raining. So I would like to just to say, based on that, I would like to ensure or make sure that we do get a comment from city staff from the council that you are looking at your operational budget on top of that. We have seen a number of things go up. You've heard comments from a number of people around property taxes that have gone up 29% in terms of revenue to the city. That's the city's share. We've got a water rate increase. This will be the third in 3 years. And yes, you guys did pass a universal trash hauling ordinance last week. When I opt out of it, that's another $10.50 per month. So I get 5 off. I'm still 5 in the hole even there. So small numbers add up to big numbers is my point. And what I would like you to consider as you're looking at this, the folks in this room are paying the bills. And I think it's a good step in the right direction to see that staff has looked at ways to reduce that, but still a 43%. I don't care if you compare it to every municipality in the state of Colorado, a 43% increase on top of a 40%, 30% increase on property taxes, on top of another city program adds up. Small numbers turn into big numbers, and we're all trying to balance our budgets. And we would ask that you try to do the same. Thanks.
Thank you.
Pat Quinn from Country Estates. First of all, I want to start out by saying to the city manager and Mr. Rudd that it was a great presentation tonight. And I have never questioned anything I given what we need to do at this point in time to move forward. That's never been my issue. And I thought the AECOM presentation was great. And so I want to thank everybody for that presentation. It's hard to turn down it when you have a quality firm like that's doing it. Mike, I want to also thank Jan tonight because it's always nice to have another accountant to speak before I do. And so I guess what I want to put in perspective where my thought process is, and particularly with my Cora request, is that I spent my career as a CFO, a CPA, and accountant. I did a lot of forecasting. I did a lot of modeling. And, assumption-driven modeling that would be checked by major investment banks and the like. And I think it's important that Brookfield has a robust model in it that we all understand. And I agree with Jan that all has detail on it. And that has been my effort on the Cora request to, which cost me $41, by the way, was to have transparency in the model. And when I received the information on the Cora request, there was no transparency on the slides in July, and I'm going to say, I want to go forward, and I'm going to ask that we have, that we have a robust planning model, and it appears that you have some, but I don't know it. Others don't know it. You have several summarized numbers, which is 4 times the numbers you had in the July slides. And so that, that's an improvement. And I really don't mean to be that sarcastic. I mean, it's really important that we have a robust model that's assumption driven. So when your sewer licenses and your water licenses don't come to that, exactly what the input's going to be in 2 or 3 changes. And that process be a very transparent process. And if people like Jan and I are interested in it, don't shoo us away, invite us in. I mean, I think we can be, we can be helpful. And so that's my message tonight. And once again, good job with AECOM.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes all the speakers who are signed up, but please come on up to the podium if you have questions or would like to be heard. State your name and neighborhood for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Marty Robinson. I live in Anthem Ranch. In 1981, when I was 37 years old, I'm a lot older now, I had a job. It was a very large company, over $1 billion in revenue a year, 100 million a month. And the job I had, part of it was to manage the flow of equipment and technology into North America. So you can imagine how complex that was with stuff spread all over, very expensive assets. And but we managed to boil that down and so we could grasp at the top level decision-making point, what's the right number to spend on equipment? And so our equipment would age out about every 5 years because it was a very, very tough environment in which we were using our equipment in the oil field. And so we knew that we had to spend about 20% of our fixed asset base a year with an average of 5 years you know, to come up with a number to budget. So when we consolidate all the budgets from all over North America, we'd look at the bottom line and say, did we spend 20% or not? So I don't get a feel we have that number here. And I just like, the stuff that's being done these days, 40 years later, is great with information technology. But sooner or later, you got to get down to nuts and bolts. And so I wonder if we have a list of all the assets we have, all the sunk costs, the average life, and can we come up with a number? What's the average life of an asset? And can we come up with that 20% number? Because we may be grossly underinvesting, particularly when you take into account inflation now. And of course, we got all the bells and whistles with the information technology, and that's great. It's fantastic. You know, I'm totally supportive of it. But I certainly would like, as a resident, to have that 20% number, whatever the heck it is. So surely with all the information technology you have, we can come up with something which they can give you. So you know, is that number anywhere near right? And do you have confidence when you speak to the citizens that you're making a good decision? That's point one, okay? Point number two is $5. As you know, Bill Clinton used to say, you can put as much lipstick on that pig as you want, but it's still gonna be a pig. You know, we're just moving the deck chairs around on the deck here, you know. And then next year, the year after, we're gonna have the same argument again. Should we still be using the general fund? Well, we know what the number is, so we need to get on with this. But as another guy should say to me in that oil field business, sooner or later, Marty, you got to bite the bullet. You know, you got to bite the bullet and make a decision. It's bullet biting time. So just get on with it. This $5 thing is just shuffling deck chairs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Luana Fletcher, Greater Wilcox Area, Ward 5. This is meant with all the love, honest to goodness, with a lot of feedback for you guys. And I would just want to say that you had the failure model available 20 plus years ago with Mile High Water. This should have been a case study, but it wasn't. Council needs to make a mandatory across the board 10% cut to all departments, period, full stop. That's because of all the increases that we've had going across here. Thank you for the presentation, guys. It looked like a 4x4 risk model, perhaps a 5x5 risk model. The problem with this type of model is that the departments, the employees, council, staff have to be honest. They have to look at everything. They have to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. Staff has to present not just what council asks for, perhaps in the trash this last time. 25% of the people cannot recycle for 75% of the population. Just does not work. So staff has to present the whole picture so that council's voting on the right stuff and putting the right stuff into the risk model. They need to have risk meetings. You can't present 1/4 or 1/2 of the data, and then you can't just vote on that. Council has to go back if it takes 4, 5, 20 times, or table it forever. We're in a crisis mode. We can't continue to pass this stuff just because. There needs to be some accountability to everything and from everyone in this city, county. We're held accountable. Everybody needs to be accountable. Can't be any more finger pointing around the desk and stuff. Because the effect is a motive. If you keep doing something again and again, and it has the same effect, you can't tell me you plan to have another outcome, but I don't believe you. At this point, I don't believe you. If you cause something again and again and again, you meant to cause that. This county is a failed county. We're in a decline and it's in crisis mode. It's time to start doing the right thing and everybody be accountable. So,
Thank you.
Bruce Peterman, Ward 4, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. Thank you. Thank you to AECom. I had a couple questions after the presentation. Things that just kind of came to light for me, and I'll just throw those out there. This is an asset management tool by AECom. I'm not sure if this is a proprietary based software type of product or what was put together. So that's just a little basic question. It was unclear to me. There was a user group mentioned that had several Colorado user groups for this asset management tool. That's good. I also think that there should be some integration, and maybe this will come with the maturity of the AECom contract as it develops with you guys, integration into the Broomfield GIS system. The GIS seems to be a very powerful tool, and we use it all the time in the work that I do. I'm an engineer as well, but we mostly do environmental projects. I was a little disappointed to see that it was not project oriented, but I understand that we were looking at a baseline for an inventory for your assets, the 9,000 plus assets. But what's the next step after that? How is that going to progress? How are you going to put in adjustments to deal with the unknowns? I guess it could become from a Monte Carlo analysis. I don't know, but that's like a statistical based analysis. The other thing that concerned me was that we go through all this work and the engineering stuff, and I love the engineering kind of side of things, and then spit it all out, and then it goes to a consensus-based workshop. So that needs to be defined a little bit in front of the program. What is that workshop going to look like? Who's it going to involve? I imagine it would involve council or subcommittees within council, and maybe even the citizens to discuss that, what the next steps are. I guess I really didn't have anything else. It does sound good that this is, the goal is to run it like a business. We've got some static numbers here. I would say that, what is it? 16 million a year if you don't look at the top ends, to take care of all of that. So, what happens to the things that are unfunded is curious, because I think that's a good, I guess those curves, you would look at the aging curves of what things are going to fall on and off the priority lists. And I'm sure this could lead, since we're only looking at the water system, this could also be looked at for the roads and construction as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Keith Mosley, Brandywine, Ward 1. So during the presentation, the analysis, to back up, the base water rate that is passed on to the residents is based on their projections, which is based on a model, which seems to be leveraging one of 4 metrics. And I'm wondering, when they take into account the other 3, will those costs change? Is this a first pass, essentially? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Ken Ebert, Ward 1, Mayor, council members, staff. I've been here, born and raised in Broomfield, been here 68 years. My dad sold most of the houses over here across the street. So I've been here for a long time. I've been in Brandywine for 40 years and never had no problem with water, sewer, or anything. And this summer, it was fine. I had water pressure going, sprinkler system, washing my house. That's how much pressure I had. Yesterday, I went, watered my peach tree in back, watered my garden in the front, went inside to wash my hands, no water, period. No water. So I'm kind of upset about this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. That is, I don't know. The question is, I guess, is the building, because you guys always want to build these apartment buildings to house more people for revenue instead of housing and stuff. Is that tap fee the same for the apartment buildings as a residential area? The other question is, single family, my house is 926 square feet, small little bedroom, not a mansion that we got up north, because I've been in those. My whole house could fit in that garage. So that's ridiculous. So are they getting charged more? Or is it all on us? The other thing is, I don't know. I don't want to get upset, so, but the trash service, that was just voted in, just, you guys did it, don't even question. We didn't have no input. The people should be voting for this stuff. Luckily, you picked my trash service, so I'm grateful for that. The problem of it is, I'm going to be paying $40 more for that trash service. I'm low on I'm on Social Security. I was on disability and the government kicked me off of it last year. So I'm just on Social Security, low income, like a lot of people here. And right now, with the economy going where it is, we can't afford it. I mean, I'm trying to help my neighbor out. He's 89 years old. He just lost his wife Sunday. I mean, I'm talking to the neighbors around the house here, around my house. Nobody even knows what's going on here of shoving that trash service. I mean, that's communist. I mean, racist. I mean, you just shoved it in with nobody knew about it. So you're going to have a lot of people very upset. So I'm just warning, you're going to have, and this water, I'll be nice. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, and staff. I'm Jesse Applegate from Country Estates, and my comment is more aimed for the community. The golden age is over. We have been running a deficit for 20 years, and we just didn't know it. Now, we can either pay up, which I know it sucks, or we can continue to kick this can down the road, which means my generation is going to have to pay it up, but even worse. I don't know about you guys all, but I much like it when I turn on my tap and there's water. So I think we should continue to find the best ways we can to fix this and not make sure it doesn't happen again. Thank you all.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to be heard? I don't see anyone else online, so now we're going to move into council member questions. Does any member of council have any questions? Oh, wait, I'm so sorry. Our new thing. We were going to have staff, if possible, if you're ready, go through the list of questions provided from our residents. I jotted down my own shorthand if anything gets missed, but let's go ahead and get the residents' questions answered first. That way we won't repeat anything that's already been answered.
Thank you. We appreciate it. I'm going to
Thank
have
you, ma'am.
Anna lead this as she has taken copious notes. And if we could just have Graham, Ken, James on standby, that would be terrific. I think the first one up is Graham.
Yeah, so thank you, Mayor, City Council. The first question I had was, can we expect similar fee increases in future years?
Future increase in rates, yes. To the same degree, no. I think next year is projected to be around 15% and then 8% and 7% after that. So part of the reason how we got here is that there were several years where we didn't even do a CPI increase or a consumer price index increase. And if we would have done that and just kept up with inflation, we'd have about $39 million more in the water fund right now, and we would not be having this conversation. So yes, we will be raising the rates as appropriate every year. That should be done through the budget process, which I kind of alluded to earlier. Thanks.
Can staff identify the positions or names or how you'll be passing down the information to future staff regarding the enterprise funds and the asset management?
Mr. Rutt, would you like to take this one or would you like me to take this one?
If you'd like to start it and I can fill in anything.
So the first name is Jennifer Hoffman. From a succession plan perspective, to Mr. Ewald's question, the institutional knowledge and handing it off twofold. One, documenting and having a repeatable process is not something that we've had before. Having technology is not something that we've had before. So those 9,000 assets, living in 8 different places, to Ms. Billsborough's conversation, in order to collapse that information from a repeatable process, it has been not only complicated, but fraught with peril when it continues to be a manual system. So as we move forward, we are committed. I am committed. You can hold me accountable and responsible. Ken, from the perspective of Public Works, the repeatable process we will outline and model. It won't be just during budget time. Part of the conversation when we look at the end budget for 2023, Ms. Billsborough, if I may address her directly. What happens within a 12-month period of time from projections and estimates is when we're looking at the CIP program for 5 years, we are not in anywhere near from a design perspective. So we've had 2 really significant projects over the last 18 months that went from 0% design to 18% design to 60 to 100%. Those are going to radically shift what our projections are for costs, which means it directly shifts what those rates are going to be. So the better acclimated we are to understand all of the phases of the wastewater treatment facility and the northern water tanks, both of those were huge items that greatly impacted, aside from the asset management piece, right? Those are the CIP projects. And to the gentleman's question on how granular are we going to get? I'm going to wrap this back to the beginning question of what is that repeatable process? Who can be responsible? Who can be accountable? Not have the finger the finger pointing or the blame game. We are committed as we move forward to be, I don't want to say as transparent as possible, to be transparent, period. To have the good, the bad, the ugly, the warts, the overruns, the overcosts, in order not only to build credibility, but to be able to execute on that roadmap so that we don't have a year of non-approval or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. Part of that accountability piece is working with partners like AECOM so that they understand where we are, who we are, what those assets are, and we begin a relationship that they begin to really understand what the underbelly is. So it's not just a repeatable process, and it's not just a technological process. It incorporates all facets from the silos that we've had before, made it not only difficult to really understand comprehensively where we were, but when we're looking at community development and the permits and the number of permits, that needs to influence what the water tap fees are. It needs to influence what those levers are with regards to development or not development or regulating any one of those pieces. We are confident that we have a comprehensive overview of each one of those elements. Are we confident that this time next year, we won't be having a repeat performance? Yes. Is it going to take a very different approach with partners like AECOM, in partnership with the finance department, with Ken's department, with community development, with the city manager's office? Again, it's a multi-pronged approach. But the person that is held accountable and responsible is me. And vicariously, Mr. Rudd, to ensure that we're getting the information. It will be consistent dialogue throughout the year. Again, it won't be a one and done. Ms. Billsborough, Boy, I'll tell you, when you are at the dais and you explain things, among all of the conversations that we've had and the patience that you've had, with this staff and with Mr. Rutt to, understand what those carryover amounts are. I know there's additional questions, that Graham can, explain and organize. And part of it, Mayor, is, enlisting our own Bernie Block from an audit perspective so that he can begin to help our utility billing, which is also manual, prior to us going into an ERP system, so that check and balance system also ensures to have fidelity. Mr. Rutt, anything to add to that?
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Mayor Pro Tem, Council. Curtis, can we bring up slide 10 off of my Q&A slides? And while you're doing that, one of the things that we are implementing in Public Works on a practical level is similar to a business plan, so that everybody in the organization within those areas know exactly what we have planned over the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years on a replacement schedule. So this is one of the slides that, based on the information that we have gleaned from the AECom work that we've done together, we have developed this preliminary 10-year water system-wide replacement schedule. We've identified them as red, which is the critical ones, which need immediate attention, medium critical, which are the next in line, and then yellow, which is identified here as low critical, as the ones that follow that. So as part of our business planning and our forecasting and our modeling for replacement of our asset management of our water lines, we have one similar for sewer, is we've identified on the map, we've identified in the table format, which streets, which water lines are scheduled to be replaced. So no matter if I would leave or the superintendent that oversees the utility division that's in charge of overseeing the water line replacement leaves, the next person who follows him has the roadmap, what was planned, where we were going, how we were going to get there. And that's part of the work that we've been doing with AECom. And part of the work that we've been doing internally is the documentation of developing these planning documents, not only on the projects, but also for the responsibilities of who is carrying out what action.
How will the ongoing communication and reporting to City Council look, or what will that look like in the future?
I think Ms. Hoffman referenced this a little bit earlier. Public Works will be coming quarterly to provide updates to council and the community on where we are with our projects and where we are with our responsibilities to ensure a safe and clean drinking water, as long as also our streets and fleet and facilities and all the areas that we're responsible for. So we'll be bringing that quarterly to council. In addition, we have scheduled 3 open houses for the public to come and meet and greet with our staff. It goes to one of the questions that came a little bit later, is that our staff will be there to answer questions. I think one of the questions related was, are some of the workers going to be available? And yes, we will have our staff available, and we'll be able to, it'll be all Public Works, so that'll include all 14 divisions of Public Works. We will all be there for those open houses. One's in February. One will be the Water Week in May, and the other one is National Night Out in August.
Thank you again, Mr. Rutt.
How is the plan going to be evaluated? Is it annually?
I'm assuming you're talking about the asset replacement plans. Our process will be, it's a continuous evaluation as we go through, because Water lines, we may have several breaks in a certain area, or we may have pressure issues in a certain area, and we have to reevaluate those on a regular basis. So there may be times where the plan has to be adjusted to address the most critical need that happens. We will continue our relationship with AECom. We are continuing to develop and go further into using them to assist us with our asset management, to include until our ERP process is completed and the asset management software is installed. We are planning on using them to assist us with the asset management through that process.
Mr. Clark, could you answer that in regards to the utility rates?
As far as the utility rates, again, as part of our budget process annually, we will look at this. A lot of our audited numbers come in January, and so that's when we usually start looking at the financials from the previous year. Obviously, we monitor it throughout the year, but where we really start looking at rates for the next year is in January and into the spring. Also working in cooperation with Ken and his group to assure we have a good CIP plan, which is a pretty integral part of the rates.
Follow up with a little additional information as far as our asset management pieces. We're also having assistance with our CIP team along with AECom. We'll be looking at pre-construction, post-construction costs on a regular basis and adjusting those costs as needed and being able to redefine or adjust projects as different scenarios may present themselves, such as lead times for equipment, lead times for parts, and those type of things.
There was a slide showing $268 million in capital spending. Is that additional capital or is that capital, total capital spent each year? I believe that was a question for AECom.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question completely.
Sure. There was a slide showing 2, 6, and 8 million in additional capital spending. Was that actually additional capital spending or was that the total capital spending?
That was additional, and that's in 2024 dollars.
Would you be kind enough to pull up that slide, please, so the doctor could reference that?
Yes, the question from the resident was, were those numbers total outlays or additional?
This is outlays for the assets that we looked at. So for the inventory of pipe and other assets that we looked at, water treatment plant, et cetera.
This is another question for AECom. The workshops that were mentioned with employee interviews, were there managers present for those interviews?
So all of the staff that works in sewer and water, they were present. So they did, I mean, it wasn't the field staff that was out in the field doing actual repairs and that, but we do ask hard questions. We do ask them to, be honest about it. They say, oh yeah, we've got this process or we do this. And we say, okay, well, show us. We don't trust, we say, show us. So we do ask those hard questions and those folks were in attendance.
Just to follow up on the staffing, we had obviously myself, our deputy directors, the superintendents of each one of those divisions, the managers and foreman levels also participated in those. So the foremans are the ones that work the work crews and are responsible for the install.
Thank you. For the $5 reduction, why is it only on the water? Can a discount be done for the other funds and not just water?
So that's a question that we have looked into, we want to also make sure that we keep the flexibility for the general fund. And so the general fund does not have, it's got a finite amount of money. And so if we start transferring it to every single enterprise, we're going to find ourselves in some of the same predicament that we're in now, where we're transferring back and forth, and it's certainly not best practice. So we only looked at water as being feasible at this time.
Does that cover the stormwater question? I wrote down stormwater, new question mark.
Thank you. I was asking for help rewording it since I didn't take a clear note on that one. So for the storm sewer, yes, we were looking for information on whether the sewer data that went into the sewer data or whether that was something else that was looked at. I believe that was AECom. It was the modeling and rates. That's separate from the sewer.
They evaluated the stormwater collection system, but AECom didn't have input into the rates other than the summaries of the graphs. So I guess that question is, they did have input as far as the rate, the graphs and the data that they reviewed, but as far as coming up with X number of dollars, that was
Ken, do you want to talk a little bit about how you came up with the $11 for the stormwater?
So on the stormwater side of things, we have, I believe it is 16 stormwater basins within the city and county of Broomfield. Each one of those stormwater systems, each one of those drainage areas drain to different parts of the various receiving waters that we have in the city and county of Broomfield. Within each one of those, there's also a series of, in a majority of them, there's a series of underground collection lines. In the Western US, it is a separate system for storm and sewer. So if you're from the East Coast, sometimes they have combined sewers. But in the Midwest, over at least Kansas West, there are separate storm, separate sewer systems. So you have a whole separate system of collection lines that have to be maintained. And each one of those have different discharge points. And those discharge points go directly to a receiving water body, whether that is Big Dry Creek on the east end of Broomfield or eventually to Rock Creek on the west side of Broomfield. And so all of those areas must be maintained and managed for the stormwater system. In addition to that, we have 54 water quality ponds that sometimes the stormwater is also used to in our communities. Several of our newer communities all have stormwater ponds that are also used as amenities, and maintaining those, as well as detention basins, which are just designed to capture the water and let it move forward, but just contain it so it doesn't flood the homes in the area around it. So Broomfield's responsible for about 114 of those. So the stormwater fee helps us to manage all of the collection lines underground and also all of the drainage above ground. Because if we don't have underground systems, we have to have above ground systems. Those above ground systems are the drainage ditches, culverts, and those type of things.
77 to 118 million is a big jump. How much of that is due to Windy Gap? How much is due to water tanks? Can you provide some information about the expenditures?
I'll first touch on the water tanks. Is a $69 million project that's in the CIP for 2026. The annual debt payments for Windy Gap are $8.7 million, and that occurs every year. And that's a 20-year bond on that one. I think if I can get to the point of the 77 million to the 118. So this is important for not only council to understand, but also the general public. Every year, we've got a lot of multi-year projects in our budget. And every year, those multi-year projects do not all get spent. And so you'll see those amounts in last year's 2023 budget. And then in the first amendment of every year, we roll those over. And so that's why you see the current year being so large, because we've got all the, even if it's an out year project and it goes out to 2025, 2026 at this point, it's all budgeted in 2024 right now. And so you'll see that large increase every year as we roll over those CIP funds. And so that's what that is. Thank you.
Do you have a list of the assets, average costs, average lifespan that we use to come up with the right numbers to ensure that Brimfield is not under investing? That question was in regard to the asset management model.
So we have the entire list that was given to us of all the water, wastewater, stormwater assets. If it's a list of all assets, I mean, that's where we'd like to see you go in the future as you move forward. We have the list of the asset values and information that we've got from basic industry standards as well. Did that answer all those questions, I think?
Before you sit down, is the asset management tool proprietary?
So I guess I want to make a clarification as you go through this journey is that, well, the tool that we use is a capital investment planning model. When you start going further down into this, we start talking about asset management softwares. Those are can be proprietary. You take them from off the shelf type softwares. Our tool is an add-on, so we'll a lot of times use it. It is proprietary to AECOM, but we do it as an add-on to those software models, asset management software models that other folks use.
Before you sit down, Anna, I'm going to go to the GIS since you're already up. I was making eye contact with James because I know that this is one of those super cool, sounds kind of fluffy, but it's deep, it's meaningful, and it's the efficacy by integrating GIS is certainly the wave of the future. Will you spend just a couple of moments and talk about how that integration looks as we move forward?
Oh, absolutely. I think GIS is very important. I mean, it's great. It's so much easier when you can see on a map, when you want to draw a grid around where am I looking? Where am I looking at doing a project? And what are all the assets that fall into that grid? A lot of the asset management softwares that are out there in the market, a lot of them do build off of GIS. There are certain ones that are more GIS centric than others. So that's something that as you go into this, we will want to sit down with you and say, okay, what do you really want to do with your asset management software in the future? Where are you going? Are you just wanting to do work orders? And I know the answer to that already, but really, how do you want to build this as you go forward? And what are the needs? What are the capabilities of your current technology stack, and where do you want to go with that? So you really need to look at it when it comes to asset management software. There's a whole swath. There's some basic tracer type softwares that are pretty basic. You got mid-level ones, and then you got the high-end ones. So what's the best one that's for you? And unfortunately, there's not one perfect software out there that does everything phenomenally. They all came from different backgrounds, whether they started as a maintenance management software, or they started as a capital planning tool, a scenario building tool. There's some that you see a lot of DOTs in that, the federal agencies in that use. But is that appropriate for a county level? It just kind of depends on really where you want to go. So that's what we like to do. I mean, the gap analysis we did, I would call kind of a mini gap analysis, because it was just looking at a focus area within the city and county of Broomfield. Really doing that evaluation and seeing where you want to go and having that. I mean, there are a lot of things, the staff can start using it. You use it for work orders. You can start seeing where you can start doing heat maps. I mean, that's a really neat thing. You do a heat map, you can start seeing, I'm going to the same area time and time again because a drainage problem, because a complaint that's coming in here, when customers call in, you can put that into the system. And now you can just start saying, hey, there's actually an issue that we need to take a step back and look at what the holistic problem is there. So there's a whole lot of stuff, and I can totally geek out on talking about all of that with the asset management softwares. But it's really looking at what's the right thing for you, and having a third party that can come in and evaluate it with you. software vendors always say my software can do everything. And while there's a lot of great software out there, just making sure you take that step back. I mean, you know, when you go talk to a car salesman, it's the best car ever, right? You've just got to make sure you pop the hood and you really look at it close and see if it meets your needs.
Is it proprietary?
The CIP tool that we ran is, yes. The GIS, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of different pieces that can come in there, but it does, we do be software agnostic where it can pull in all those different pieces. If you guys roll into a software program that can do that, then that's another piece that you can just look at doing. But I think we do it pretty efficiently.
Just to follow up a little bit more, just so you know what we are doing with the GIS currently, is that we do use GIS. It has all of our water lines, has all of our sewer lines, has all of our stormwater lines, has all of our water meters. And we are about 75% complete with the water meters and our service taps to each one of the residents and businesses that we use. And so it does have several layers within the GIS program that we are currently using and developing. I do have a couple of slides if you're interested to show you what that map looks like.
Sure.
You can look at my questions. So here in this slide, this is a map that we printed off of our GIS mapping system. So this shows you the blue is our water lines that we have mapped on our GIS system. And the green is the sewer lines. And it also identifies the inventory that we have as far as piping, storage, our valves, our pressure regulators, where our booster stuff pumps are at, and where each one of the 4,342 fire hydrants are located at. And then we also have the collection line and then we also have one for stormwater. So just to show you part of how we are using GIS currently, which would be something that we would like to incorporate into an asset management in the future.
Mayor, this is part of the last 4 years of discovery and not only discovery, but discovery and memorializing. So we had to understand where it was and what it was before we could transfer into where we are right now, which is how to take care of it and what is the state. So again, it's been 4 years along with the business development agreements and the regular agreements and the handoff with HOAs and the parks and trails and paths. This is the utility infrastructure mapping is no different.
What is next after this initial assessment? How do we look forward and consider the unknowns?
All these are great questions. And that's all part of I think the plan that we have set forward tonight, which is our quarterly updates, our continuing working with AECom and continuing to dive deeper and deeper into our assets and having them assist us with our asset management planning, also assist us with our capital evaluations and moving forward. And it's a daily, weekly, monthly ongoing activity. It's not just a one time a year and punch out the CIP budget, but it is a ongoing process that we'll be working with them.
What is the consensus-based workshop? What does that look like? And does it involve citizens and council?
I'm glad I get an opportunity to talk about this. Before I do, I do want to add though on the ArcGIS or the GIS stuff. ArcGIS is not proprietary to AECom. That is an industry standard that is used. The city uses it. I would also say when Ken showed that map, that's great. What you can also do when you have an asset management system is you can also start clicking on those nodes that are in there and you can see what condition it is. What condition was it the last time you inspected? What condition was it 10 years ago? And as you build those inspections and you can see all of that information, we've got folks that we work with that even put in, if they televise the sewer, they can actually put that video in there. So you can actually see that and see as that progresses. So there's some really neat things you can do with the GIS and pulling that in and putting all those softwares together. The consensus building workshop was not talking about the rates or the funding levels. What that was is going through the gap analysis and saying, okay, where are you today? What condition is your data in? So it's really looking at your business processes. Do you have a change management process? Do you have an organizational structure? You know, who's doing asset management? Who's like a fundamental thing? Who's responsible for each of the assets? And that seems like a silly question to ask, but sometimes you'll get into some groups and it'll be like, who's responsible for this sidewalk? Everybody thought somebody else was responsible for it. So nobody was really, they'd maintain, somebody'd go out and take care of it if somebody complained. But that's definitely something that we want to look at. Do you have enterprise partners? And that's what that organization, that group that was put up there, that's in the region of Colorado. And really what you want to do is you want to do that knowledge sharing. There's no sense in you guys building the wheel, creating it, and trying to figure out how to make everything work. Use the folks that are out there that if they've done it before, or maybe they're in the same boat that you are, and how can you move that forward? Did I answer the question? I think I got them. I think the next one's mine too.
The model is based on leveraging 1 of 4 prioritization criteria metrics. Will it change when you take into account the other 3?
So Dr. Peskin can come up and answer or add to it. But really what that's looking at is that's not really going to change the dollars that are in there. What that does is that allows you to start looking more on the project basis where you can say, what should you fund first? So that's what that's doing, looking at what the risk is, because right now it's just looking at the big picture and what the condition, it's just looking at condition.
So far, we've just looked at age and condition as the basis for prioritization. The additional factors are risk, operating cost, and a strategic goal score. As Bridget mentioned, it allows us to refine the prioritization so that what we're projecting into the future in terms of what assets get funded when is more in line with what the management actions would actually be next year, 5 years from now, 15, 20 years from now. We're trying to align, we're trying to emulate the decision-making process through these 4 factors. I would also point out that the relative weighting of the factors is a judgment call. And one of the things that we can do is to examine, well, how much of the decision should be based on age, how much of the decision should be based on risk, how much on cost, and how much on strategic goals. Good asset management practice suggests that risk should be a relatively heavy part of the priority score, but it's something that we can play with. And once we assemble that additional data, we can look at the results, essentially turn the knobs on the model to expand or contract the various wedges of the pie and see what impacts that has. And what we may find is that it'll have some impact on overall condition, will have some impact on reliability or on operating costs downstream.
Mr. Clark, I think the last 2 questions are for you. Is the license fee for apartment buildings the same as for a single-family residential area?
Apartment buildings are an equivalent. And so I think a tap fee for a single family home is around 35,000. And an apartment building has a 0.6 equivalent. And so it's roughly around 21,000 per unit.
Are people who have a larger home charged a larger fee?
So it costs us the same amount to deliver water, whether it's a big house or a little house. So on the water base charge, it's the same. When we look in stormwater, for instance, it's also a base fee. And so obviously people have different size yards and therefore the usage component is different and they go into different tiers based on your size of your yard. But the base charge is the same for all single family residences.
Mayor, those were the questions that we had recorded.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burtonzetti and Ms. Hoffman. I do want to, is this a first pass or will the metrics change? That was another question a gentleman brought up, like, is this just, are these going to be final figures coming forward for council's consideration, or will there be any changes before we make these decisions? I feel like this is pretty.
The current decision before you all for the current rates for 2025 aren't going to change.
Okay. And I am curious why the gentleman in Brandywine didn't have any water. Did we have something going on in that neighborhood? No? Okay.
Not that we were aware of, and if he would like to give us his address, we will track it down and see why that occurred. Occasionally, we do have issues with pressure reducer valves that need to be repaired, and sometimes they could cause an issue. So yeah, we'd like to meet with him and get his information and be able to troubleshoot that.
Reach out to us. I don't know if he's still here, but yeah, let us know. We'll look into it. All right, well, I think that concludes the questions from our residents. So let's move on. If you want, we can take our 10-minute recess now. It's 8:06. We'll take 10 minutes and be back at 8:16. Thank you.
The Access Live event has ended. Thank you for calling. Goodbye.
Welcome back, everyone. We're going to resume our study session on water and sewer enterprise, and we were starting our council questions and comments portion. So I'll allow everybody to get to their seats and ask council who would like to go first. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question about the model and how that works. So when we're seeing those results, are we seeing the median outcome? Is that even an appropriate question to ask? Are there multiple kind of percentiles of outcome that you could see for each sort of additional bit of cash flow?
So Bob's not in here right now, but when we put those funding, the 2 million, 4 million, 6 million, it was actually separate from any funding from your side of things. It was more, we look at what's an unconstrained, because we like to see what if money's no object, what would it take? And we know that's not the reality, but it kind of gives you that book in between that. And then we put in the different funding scenarios and we just tweak it and play around with it to say, okay, what if we put 2 million in here? What numbers does that get? That did get rid of the backlog. What's the next number? And then that's what it is. So if you wanted to see other funding runs, that's definitely something that can be done. And like he said during the presentation, it runs pretty quick. They're minutes. Don't take a huge amount of computing power to pull that together.
Okay, thank you. I should clarify my question, I suppose. So for instance, the $6 million additional cash flow item, I would assume that if the model has multiple inputs, for instance, if you were looking at a model and you had, oh, this is the average time to decay we would be looking at, there's actually a range of outcomes. Maybe it's a little bit smaller, maybe it's a little bit larger. You put all of those into a model and actually the same run would, if it's like Monte Carlo style, you would end up with a different kind of scenarios for one run under one like $6 million condition. So I'm trying to tease that out. Is that not how the model is run? I could be making an incorrect assumption there.
In statistical terms, it's a deterministic model. So we're not addressing in any particular scenario, we're not addressing uncertainty. What we can certainly do, because the model runs relatively fast, is we can run a lot of scenarios and we can play with uncertainty, say with respect to cost or with respect to useful life. We can run a lot of what ifs. You know, Monte Carlo simulation essentially runs it automatically or iteratively. We can do it manually because any simulation takes, 10 seconds maybe to run. We can do that type of analysis, and that's a reasonable next step.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's very helpful. I was just kind of wondering like what kind of model it is, whether there is a distribution of outcomes. And if so, each of those outcomes, are we looking at the median one? Have we considered the 99th percentile, the first percentile, that sort of thing? But that does not sound applicable, like an applicable question. So thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you, Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions. My first question is to AECOM. I asked Mr. Rutt this last time we had a presentation about the water, and basically the question or the scenario is, what if we didn't do anything? And that's always an option, right? We don't do anything. We don't raise the rates. What are the repercussions and the consequences and the risk that could happen? And, you can give us like a doomsday scenario, or you could just, tell us what would happen.
All right. Bad things will happen. I think is the simple answer. And this, I think it's intuitively clear that if we spend less money, the backlog's going to grow, conditions going to get worse. Reliability, if we were able to measure it, and once we get some of the GIS data, we'll be able to measure it. Reliability will get worse. And operating costs, particularly for water assets, will increase. And we're able to relatively quickly explore, here's what happens across a range of funding levels, which correspond to the rate increases we're talking about this evening.
Thank you. No, for my, suspicions of what would happen if we do nothing. So thank you for answering that. My next question is, Lafayette and Boulder are just down the street, 5 minutes away. Why, and this is, maybe you guys don't know this, but why are their rates so much higher compared to ours, even though we're basically in the same radius?
Just came from Boulder. So, so they have the largest flood risk in the state. And so they've got a very high stormwater fee. And so when we look at those are a combination of all your utility rates. On the flip side, they actually do have water rights that were pretty senior. And so their water's a little bit lower, but their sewer and stormwater are considerably higher because of where they are located geographically. Lafayette, I think, has more junior rights than us in terms of water rights and when they were acquired, and all that goes into the cost of what consumers pay on an ongoing basis. So those are two different reasons. Everybody's a little bit different. I think certainly I would say Boulder had, they've done rate increases continuously over time. And so they're not in the backlog situation that we are. So they've, kept a little bit better and their system overall. But, every community is different. So it really is apples and oranges. Yeah. And there's different reasons for different communities and where they get their rates.
Thank you so much. Those are really my two main questions. And actually, no, I have one more question. On the proposal for the funding utility fund, is this an opt-in or is this going to be automatically given to all residents for this $5 fund?
It would be uniform blanket across all single-family residences. Again, it doesn't, it's not for commercial, but it would be, apartments, duplexes, single-family homes. It's any residential class that we bill.
Thank you. No further questions, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Ward. Oh,
Mayor,
sorry, Ms. Hoffman.
I just want to clarify that what was presented from a rate increase in July is what is on the table now. Council can make the determination to do that additional option, taking out of the general fund, or remain where the original amount was in July. So we haven't done anything automatically to say we're going to take out of the general fund. That's up for council's further discussion and direction.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. My questions are going to go around the transfer of the property tax or just general funds into the enterprise fund. I guess my first question is, how does that create a repeatable process? If we're only going to do it for 5 years, and basically we're kind of kicking the can down the road as to when they're going to fully pay that other, the $5, and does that compound?
I don't know if I would classify it as kicking the can because the full rate is going to be realized. So the operations itself will be fully funded. It's how we fully fund it. So
yeah, I'm kicking the can. I mean, what the residents are going to end up paying
Sure.
on their end.
Oh, thank you.
From the bill is going to be kicked down the road, basically. Yes, I see. We're just subsidizing basically with general fund dollars.
Correct.
So that end is fine, but it's their end. They're just eventually going to have to pay it sometime. We're just kicking it down the road. So how does that create a repeatable process? I just don't see that in my mind.
I think the repeatable process is less about the funding. When we talk about the repeatable process, that is really how we move through the year, ensuring that we have a comprehensive approach. And that comprehensive approach isn't going to vary one year to the next. So when we talk about a repeatable process, the model itself is going to have numerous elements, a multidisciplinary approach. So we'll know what's going to be plugged into each one of those components. So from a repeatable process, we're not looking at that $5 as a repeatable process or not. It's simply a temporary relief valve, if you will, with the real point being having a fully funded, sustainable
Okay.
prize fund.
Okay, and then I guess obviously that transfer from the general fund to the enterprise fund is subsequent to appropriation each year.
That's correct.
And I guess my concern is, as we have seen over these past couple of years, many attempts to continue to reduce property taxes, and that puts further strain on budget. So if we're planning on subsidizing the residents with this $2.243 million transfer each year, and then something happens either at the state legislature because they continue to ratchet down the residential and commercial assessment rates, or a citizen initiative occurs, whatever the case may be, I don't see that being a guarantee, and I just have concerns about that.
So noted.
My next question then goes to, if we are transferring general fund dollars, what are we cutting in the general fund? Because obviously we don't have just a grand old surplus that we can just pull from.
We do not. And so in the last 3 years, when we've talked, Councilmember Ward, about the 3 buckets, and you heard a little bit about this from the department heads last week, that the process has really been to look at your internal budgets rather than ask for additional funds, which is why on the 2025 budget, even with costs going up, we're increasing the overall budget about 3.7%. Part of that is the application and the fruition of really following those 3 mandates. So the conversations that Graham and his team have been able to have, and that our department heads are also in alignment with, is you look at your internal budget first. And so historically, we've had very large rollovers. And I know rollovers are usually for CIP, but when you kind of like that zero-based budgeting, right? You spend as much as you can until the end, and then that budget is essentially what you think you're going to get the following year. Rather than doing self-introspection to be able to say, if you want to start a new project or initiative or program or add FTEs, what's going to happen within your department for you to be able to afford that, rather than going back to that general fund. So we've been able to lessen that rollover because again, you want to ensure that the monies that you have are not only being wisely spent, but you don't have these huge rollovers every year. So we've been able to really manage that. Again, that's reflected in the 3.7% increase. So what that 2.5, that's part of that cushion, if you will, the $5 million cushion from one year to the next to absorb and accommodate those unforeseen costs. So again, it requires continued diligence on that general fund. So we are confident that that funding availability is there going into 2025. And it will require, again, not reprioritization of additional asks, but reallocation of additional asks. So rather than saying what's going to come first, second, third, or fourth, it's really what isn't going to happen in order for this additional funding request to occur. And those are the future conversations.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, staff believes that there is enough cushion in the 2025 budget that we can move the roughly $2.5 million over into the enterprise fund without major consequences to the existing proposed budget.
Correct.
For this year, conversations might look different in subsequent years.
They will look different in subsequent years.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. And then my last question is, and maybe I'm recalling this incorrectly from our first or second or however many study sessions ago we had this. There was a proposal by staff knowing that these large proposed increases were going to hurt certain residents disproportionately to others. That there would be I guess, money set aside within the proposal to be an assistance fund for those who are income qualified.
Correct.
Has staff pinned down what that income level is, what that assistance level is, et cetera?
We have not.
Okay.
What the first conversation is really the structure for the administration piece. I know Councilmember Marsh Holshan had mentioned maybe providing the funding to Fish or one of our other nonprofits. And in conversations internally with staff, we have the mechanism and the structure right now through our senior property tax exemption. And so for efficiency and not to be redundant from the administration piece, again, you really want the funds to be in the supporting those that need it versus the administration piece. So we have an administration piece here. So it's scaling that up to be able to say the application that we're already using for the senior property rebate can be, have an added Q&A, so a universal application, if you will. So the process and the review looks the same. If we go to a nonprofit and or a community foundation, we don't know what that load is going to be. We don't know what the need is going to be. We don't know what the fundamental ask or lift is going to be. So we don't want to have administration here for one program and then have a nonprofit have to staff up for an additional administrative. We feel confident, Councilmember Ward, that in the if the budget is approved along with the enterprise funds, that we will be able to stand this up certainly by January 1st, come back to council in November. I mean, we've started having those conversations about what the levels look like, what the qualifications look like. Does it mirror the senior property tax with regards to the 60% AMI, 80% AMI? What is that income-based look like? So again, the structure is what takes the time. Applying the qualification isn't really the time-consuming piece. So again, we're confident that scaling it up is one thing. Additionally, the technical knowledge of when folks call, when they start getting those water bills, it's hard to bifurcate that and have them call someone else for the level of assistance. We want to be able to provide that turnkey information and support.
Okay. With that program or the assistance fund, then is it really only going to be relegated to those who are basically mirroring our property tax exemption? So seniors, individuals with IDD, and certain disability, for example? Or are we also going to try and target a wider audience, knowing that, for example, I have seniors in my apartment complex even.
Sure.
Who I don't know what their income situation is. I am going to venture to guess many of them probably will feel the pain of I think it's a $30 increase for the multifamily.
Sure.
Per month. Are they going to be able to seek relief, or are we just going to continue to send this to homeowners?
We're anticipating that it's going to be income qualified, period.
Okay, good. And you're confident it'll be in November when we will see what that kind of program and assistance and income looks like?
It really has to be by November, because when we're communicating out before those bills hit, they need to have a sense of what the resource looks like. We need to ensure that our staffing is going to accommodate, and we have to ensure that that our utility billing folks are equipped. And so we're not thinking that it's going to be on the utility billing scaling up. We're thinking that it's going to be in the economic vitality with the housing, that this isn't just going to be another mechanism of support.
Okay. And I'll have this question for when that actually comes forward, but I'm
Sure.
gonna plug it in right now.
Okay,
So
please.
no answer. Obviously, renters don't get a bill from the city for their water. It's built into our rent. So figuring out a way how you're going to reach those income aligned individuals who are in a rental situation, particularly in multifamily units, I think should be important for that plan.
So noted.
But other than that, thank you for the presentation. I don't really have any questions for staff or AECom. I appreciate the work you guys did in conjunction with staff. I know you're looking for kind of guidance on whether or not to do the transfer per year. I just have concerns about what those conversations look like going forward and whether or not that those dollars will be there for the next 5 years, given what has happened historically with property taxes in this state. And so I am not necessarily in favor of that, particularly since we are doing a assistance fund for individuals who are going to be impacted more than some of our residents who are rather well off.
Appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. Councilmember Lim.
My first question, AECom ran models with different annual funding for asset management. It seemed that the consensus then on that one slide was that $6 million would be the goal for water funding, asset management, additional per year, and sewer was 8 to 10 million. Can you explain how you landed? They ran a series of models. On water, it seemed you picked the highest model they ran. And in sewer, you kind of picked the mid-range that they ran. That's just an observation, but what made you land on a certain number? I mean, they have the long range, so you get the picture of what's left over to do later as far as the assets.
The funding levels that we ended up with were based on what the impact was on the backlog, the downstream backlog. In the case of water, it was very much driven by the long-term need to invest in the water treatment plant. So we're raising the rates in anticipation of that. And at that highest funding level, the water treatment needs, by the time they occur, we have enough cash available to pay that off. So it was, in general, the goal was, let's look what happens to the backlog in the long term and find a funding level that manages that. In other applications, typically, we've been looking at funding levels that stabilize the backlog or decrease it to zero by a date certain, by the end of the analysis period or by 5 years before the end of the analysis period or even sooner. There's no right decision here. So it's a public policy question of how prepared do you want to be for these eventual, particularly for water, downstream, relatively large downstream needs.
And was that a conclusion reached just by AECom, or was that a conclusion reached by staff? And was that number then incorporated into the 2025 budget and in projections going forward for rates too?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Lim. Ken Rutt, Director of Public Works. On the water side, what we looked at was our water line replacement program. And we looked at the 6 million and what we are currently spending. So at the current spending rate, it would take us, get the number right here. $410 years to replace our water lines at the current spending rate. So with the rate increase, we would almost double the amount. We funded, we are projecting 5.47 million. The table said 6 million. That would cut the replacement down to 173 years. So as we built our water line replacement, we built two tables, one with the rate increase and one without. So the one that we are planning with is the one that is with the increase, because it's obviously doesn't make sense to do 410 years. So we did project it with the rate increase to move forward. And in that rate, we did have a escalator, I believe, in the budget forecast over the next 5 years as that would go up. On the sewer side, we are continuing our condition assessment, and we'll be working with AECom to tighten that one up. Because on the sewer side, what we're doing is 25% of the system we are videotaping with our camera, and then we can sit down with them and assess how much of the sewer lines, what they look like condition-wise and age-wise.
Okay, on the proposal, I had questions. What can you give, we have projections that you had given us on what the rates will rise subsequent years beyond this coming year for what staff had originally proposed. And I'm not asking if you have them now, but can we have, is it possible for us to have before the, rates come before us October 1st or whatever it is, for us to have projections then for the subsequent years if we lower the rates by $5 for the water rates? Can you, I know those projections are estimates, and I read that they're subject to change based on conditions, but lowering, you're saying, generally speaking, lowering the rates $5 are going to possibly change the rates in the future or not?
No.
Are we
just
assuming we're going to borrow every year from the general fund?
Just to be clear, the rates would stay the same. So we still need a $40 increase. It's only that $5 is coming from the general fund.
Okay.
So the rates would remain the same. Our projections are remaining the same. Yes, we have projections out the next 5 years in accordance with our CIP. We generally provide the first 3 years of projections, which we've provided, and we could provide again certainly before the first.
Okay, so the projections are going to remain the same. Okay. This is a question maybe for the attorney and partly for staff. So in the memo, it says that if we move forward with reduction of the water rates by $5 monthly, that the budget reduction as far as the total budget, the items that would be reduced by that 2.25 million would not be available in the budget that comes forward for the first vote on October 1st, and that we won't see it until October 22nd. Is that, did I understand that correctly? This is a slight problem in my mind, because then we are amending the budget on second reading. And then we would have to have, it's possible then that council would, let's say, council may not like what staff amended on that, to take out that 2.25 million on October 22nd. Therefore, if we wanted to amend that budget on October 22nd, then we would have to have a third reading. Is that correct?
The budget is a one vote action.
It's,
But are you thinking of the public hearing?
we have,
Councilmember Lim, may I clarify? Because
Yes.
it'll help our, so we are not saying, we're not talking about reducing the water rates. We're talking about a general fund contribution to the rates.
yes,
And that 2.25 million to accommodate that isn't going to require a budget reduction. So there's nothing that we're saying we're not going to be able to do in order to take that 2.5. Every year we have a cushion rollover, so we don't balance down to zero.
Okay.
So out of the 345 million, generally, you know that you're becoming more adept at your expenditures when you don't have these really wide fluctuations of balances. So we're taking it out of that $5 million cushion that was built in. So we're not going to pick and choose what isn't going to happen. It's simply going from the 5 million to half of that, so that when we go into 2025, if there are unforeseen circumstances or costs that are more than 2.5 million, then we will have to look, just like we ask our departments to do, right? Find it from internal, not external.
all right. Thank you for that clarification. That helps me a lot. Okay. There have been a lot of emails from residents, and I'll just read how one resident in Ward 3 worded it. So the residents are concerned that they are receiving higher rates because development is not paying for itself. So this is the way one resident worded it. Was the city really prepared to take on all the new apartment complexes and the mass amounts of resources needed, or are we all paying for it now through rate increases? Can someone answer that?
I'll take the first shot at that, and then Graham can answer from a finance perspective. No, that's incorrect. And the reason that is incorrect is part of the conversation that we've been having for most of July and tonight is really the backlog and the asset management piece. So when we're talking about delivering water to existing customers and to new customers, when communities say just shut down development altogether, essentially what that means is not just residents, but commercial as well. We know that residents are more expensive for the city, and really it's the commercial base that allows us that ratio and that equilibrium. So when you have I'm not sure how the resident referred to that, again, Councilmember Lim, but the explosion in growth is when you look at the 2024 budget right now. So if you looked at the unaudited slides from the July presentation, we're in the black. And so folks are saying, in 2024, you're in the black. Why are you having this water rate increase? It's for the future, primarily because we're looking at that wastewater treatment facility. So it contributes to it, yes. But it's not the reason. It's not correlate. There's a correlation, but there's not a direct causation between growth and the exponential and or increase. It really gets back to the asset management piece. So the simplest way to think of it is had we done what was recommended from the last water rate increase in 2012, we wouldn't be where we are now, whether we had increased or whether we hadn't increased from a dramatic population. We would be where we need additional water in the north, and we need the wastewater treatment facility, and we need to start taking care of our existing assets before we even looking at the new assets. So it's not as easy to say, if we would have pulled this lever, something better would have happened. But on the conversely, had we not had that growth, we would still be having this conversation because there's been no increases for such a long period of time.
Okay, thank you. I'd heard that a lot, from residents. Ponds, do we have a complete list of ponds now? And have we informed HOAs if they are the ones responsible for maintaining them? I know we're having a consultant come in and do a look at what needs to be prioritized, but do we have the basic information and have we conveyed that?
So under our stormwater permit that the city has been issued from the state of Colorado, we're required to inspect and monitor every water quality pond, every detention pond. And so we do work with the private entities to ensure that they are upkeeping theirs. And for the HOAs that have ones that they maintain, we also work with them. For the ones that the city are maintaining, as you mentioned, we are, one of the budget requests in 2025 budget is to have a consultant come in and evaluate each one of the 54 ponds that the city is required to maintain and evaluate and to provide us with the critical nature of each pond. What is some of the corrective action items that need to be taken for each pond? And then we can prioritize based on how much revenue we have and put together a maintenance program to address those needs. So long question to say, yes, we have them all.
Okay, I think my time's up.
We'll do a second round, council member, if needed. Councilmember Cohen?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a quick first question related to the item in front of us of the $5 discount. I really don't want to spend $2 million a year for a discount. I don't think anybody will feel, but I wanted to ask, was there any, I think Councilmember Ward asked this, would just ask at a different angle. Was there any consideration or is it possible to target a discount to those at the lowest economic rung? You know, for example, I think 1,500 households of the 30,000 households in Broomfield would be at the poverty level. So if we wanted to shield them from any increase, so $20 a month over 3 years would be 150,000. So far less expenditure from us, but would be more impactful for those people who are least can afford this kind of steep increase. I don't know if that's feasible or has it been thought of as an alternative to just giving a across the board $5 to a lot of people who don't need the $5.
Yes, it's feasible. Although it's a different target audience and it's a different amount of impact and it's a different amount of qualifications, it would then become a line item, if you will. And because if again, that subsidy being provided, can't get used to that for 3 years and then say, you know, again, that would be more of a in perpetuity from a level of support, and less about the target audience or the time frame. So if you're targeting 30, 40, 50% AMI, that really then becomes a policy decision for council that we are going to have a subsidized line item in the budget every year. Does that make sense, Councilmember Cohen?
Yeah, I'm just saying that that would be more meaningful as an expenditure to people who are most impacted by these increases. That, you know, most people, if they don't like it and they have the budget for it, but there are some people who just $20 a month is a lot of money and it's not something they can afford and it's water. So if we can, for a small expenditure, shield them from these unexpected increases, I think is a policy matter that would probably be more effective than just referring people to the nonprofits and go through that rigmarole of trying to qualify themselves. So I think, I don't know how my colleagues feel, look to that approach rather than what's on the table in front of us. Second, I wanted to just go back to the issue of assumptions. If you could explain that more to me, some of us, I think most of us, there are some among us who, if they see the expiration date on the gallon of milk, it's gone that day, and the rest of us take the sniff test and maybe go a little bit longer. So in your analysis of our water lines, it seems like arbitrary. Do you went by the date of the expected date that you think they'll fail, or based on past, based on industry expectations or manufacturers' recommendations? How did we come to what is critical, what is failure? And to corollary to that, I think we had 3 main failures in the last year. I remember 3. I think there's one in Westlake, one in Interlochen. Were they on our critical list? Because I know it's hard to predict when things will fail versus what might be projected.
The useful lives that we used varied by asset class. Some were provided to us by the city, some were based on the judgment of our cost estimators. I think this is a place where the earlier suggestion that we do some uncertainty analysis and look at what the impacts are of longer or shorter lives certainly makes a lot of sense to do. It's relatively easy to do it. So I think that's an appropriate next step.
Well, I asked because, you may have arrived at a rate that puts us in the middle of our neighboring communities, but it's still an extremely steep increase. Everybody else is getting a couple percent. It's far easier to plan for that than this sudden steep climb. Is there a way to flatten that curve? You just mentioned 410 years. I've never heard that figure before. That was our current rate. And then we landed here at 173 years. All due respect, what difference would it make if we went to 250? If we could flatten the curve, are we increasing our risk substantially of a massive failure of infrastructure? I mean, I know the 3 main lines that we had was a lot of work at the time, but it didn't bring down the system. In other words, it's a matter of risk. We all do it. I know I did it with my water heater. I went 10 years beyond what the manufacturer said because it was still working, and I took that risk. So is it reasonable to say we could flatten that curve in order to give our residents a little more relief and get to the point we need to get to, but not at such a steep climb all of a sudden?
Well, I'll go back to one of your other questions you had first, which was, is Westlake in the plan water line replacement? Yes, that's most of the water line replacement projects that we have scheduled. The second question you kind of brought up is how many water line breaks did we have? 2023, we had 18. So far in 2024, we've had 22. We are projecting 28 in next year, 30 in 26, and projecting 34 in 2027, based on some condition assessments. For the size of system that we have, basically the AWWA indicates that what they consider the median before a line needs to be where it's considered failed is roughly 32 breaks, and we're looking at 34. So in 2027 is our projection. So if you're looking at it, it all depends on failure, how many residents are impacted, how long it takes, how many fail at the same time. We've had 2 in the last 2 weeks. Last year we had 4 at the same time. And we had 3 of those lasted over 16 hours on each one of those repairs. We had to use our division superintendent and our deputy director of public works, along with a contractor, to address the 4th one because we just ran out of staff. There was no more people available to fix the line. So what is the risk? And one of the things that we'll be working with AECOM is looking at risk. And that's the critical nature of drinking water, is that it does impact people, it does impact them now. So is the risk leaving those 16 people without water for 24 hours?
To follow on that, I had a question related to that. When you are replacing water lines, I assume you're using a company to bring in. If we were ramping up the replacement of water lines, is there vendor capacity to get to that rate?
One of the things we've had conversations with AECom to date with is what is the most cost-effective way as we ramp up our water line replacements? Is that to use contractor services or is that to bring it in-house? And one of the things we are working with them now is to evaluate what is the cost savings and at what level does that make sense to have our own in-house water line replacement team. City of Westminster, I believe Denver Water has their own teams to replace some of those.
Would we expand our team or?
In that case, we would have to expand our team. And so one of the things we're evaluating is how many people would that be? How much equipment would that be? What are those costs? And we would be bringing a recommendation to our city manager and then going from there.
Councilmember Cohen, if I may, Graham, can you answer from a financial perspective about the need to bond for the water tanks and for the wastewater? And how much of that is the increase of the base?
Yeah, the wastewater expansion and the water tanks are drivers of the base. The AECom, not as much. So to flatten it, no, we cannot flatten it. We've looked at it. It does not make sense as we go forward and bond and look towards the future to reduce the $40 any more than potentially this $5 that we've talked about today. Additionally, I wanted to add, I think our utility billing team would have a very difficult time administering the 1,500 folks that you had mentioned in the, we don't know every resident's salary. And I think I'd have probably the 4 people on the utility billing team probably quit if that was given to them as kind of, can you do this? That's a very difficult administrative item. We're already, that team is a team of 4. They work extremely hard. They do a great job answering questions. But I think that'd be a little bit too much administratively for that team to take on.
One last question with my time. And I wasn't here in July when this was originally rolled out. And I think one person in the public referenced this angle. I think all 3 years I've been on council, I voted for water rate increases, or at least feels like it. So every year there's another increase. Last year, the increase was pretty big and it was a master plan, so to speak, with, was it Wiedner or Widener? I don't know how you pronounce it, that consultant.
Windan.
And then less than a year later, I think now we have the AECom and an even larger increase with the projection. And I think someone asked, well, what's going to mean next year? There'll be something, another one. So I'm curious what happened between the master plan last year that prompted us to bring in AECom and get to this point this year. I missed that in the earlier discussion.
Sure, I'm going to take the first shot at it, Ken. So when we're coming out of the first real exploration was Broomfield's done a great job of securing water, and that was the Windy Gap firming project. As we looked at the rates the subsequent year, that's again, it's a snapshot in time. And it wasn't a comprehensive approach, and it wasn't a rate study. It didn't include, while it included CIP, it didn't include the water tanks nor the wastewater treatment facility. So again, it's part of what we were talking about before, that while we knew we had to do the wastewater, we weren't in design. And so you come up with a number and you say, based on everything that we know right now, our best guess is $100 million. As you move through that design phase, which occurred from the Wildan study originally, right? And the Wildan study also didn't have that asset management approach. The Wildan study was looking back at what should those increases have been from that long-range financial plan historically. So again, it was a static recommendation, nor did it have the northern water tanks. So by the time we get done putting in design, 100% design for the water tanks, along with the wastewater treatment facility, which has now been broken up into 3 various phases, and you're looking at the debt that we have for Windy Gap already and those current obligations, even without any of the asset management, when we're looking at bonding for those 2 projects, we have spent years borrowing from the from the sewer in order to pay for the water. It kind of gets back to Councilmember Lim's question about why aren't those 2 amounts the same? Why is one 6 to 8 million and the other one is 4 to 6 million? It's based on the available revenue that we have right now and the expenditures, not for 2024. But when you look back at those slides, when you see it going into the red and staying into the red for the next 5 years. So we knew 35% with the Wildan study, Councilmember Cohen. We know 85% now. I think 90% is as good as it's ever going to get, and the other 10% is going to be based on cost and increases and unforeseen. But primarily it's building up those reserves. We don't have any reserves in any of those funds because we've tapped into those reserves. So we can't even bond right now in order to do those 2 projects until we build up that reserve. And that's the recommendations of the rate increase.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, I'm done.
Thank you. Next is Councilmember Marshall Holston.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to spend too much time on why we're here, but I did have 2 questions that came up during that discussion. You mentioned that the Wilden study didn't include those things. I guess the question is why? Why didn't we foresee it enough to put that in the study?
Several things. First and foremost, we didn't give them the information that we gave to AECom. So not only was it the asset management piece, again, having the data out there in 8 different places, we didn't have an asset management approach with Wildan. We didn't have that 2 years ago. Our mindset wasn't there. Our mindset was recalibrating just for the rate studies, which is why we pulled the 2 levers and didn't increase the base. And we didn't have the northern water tanks amount to bond, and we didn't have the first phase of the wastewater treatment facilities. So when you combine those 5 things together, it really does. I mean, it makes the difference between going into the long range plan.
And then kind of on the same line, I'm just curious about this. The Wildan study, I was looking back through the appendixes. It has our replacement value of all of our assets, and I totaled it up at 1.01 billion.
Mm-hmm.
But the AECom study has us at 3.119. And I'm just curious to know, how did we do a 300% increase in our total asset replacement value in just 2 years?
So we didn't look at, we took a look because somebody had asked this question earlier. When the Wideland study, if I'm pronouncing that right, looked at it, they just took the original construction costs. So the original construction cost is what was used as a replacement cost. That study also happened pre-COVID. So we've seen huge increases in anything that you're building, anything, if you need to replace it, just replacing it in kind is significantly more than what it was before. So those are the biggest issues that were there. I don't know if there was anything else that we saw on that, if you recall, but I mean, those are pretty fundamental changes between what we put in and when what we've put into the model was replacement costs today.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. I do have a follow-up question on one thing that you said during the presentation. You ran the models of our asset management stuff based upon that one metric, but then you had three other metrics that you had two pie charts, one that was, and so my big question is, if next year we decide to run the model based on all four metrics rather than just the one, can we expect this number to change dramatically?
Not dramatically, to answer the question. Keep in mind that what that pie chart was representing was the prioritization process does not affect what the total need is. Just given a restricted budget, what projects get funded first, which projects trail behind. There would be an impact from year to year on the resulting backlog, condition, reliability, operating cost. Quite often what we end up seeing as we play with the relative weighting of those four components is that we may end up in the same place 20 years downstream, but along the way, we may see that in a scenario where risk is more heavily weighted than another, that the backlog is different between now and the end of the analysis period, or the condition of the assets is different, or the operating cost is different.
So the prioritization could change, but how much we actually need to spend every year probably wouldn't change very much.
Particularly in the long run.
Okay, all right, thank you, that's important. I want to go back to the questions on the discounts, or am I remembering it wrong? I thought the original conversation was it was supposed to be more of an emergency fund if somebody was about to get their water shut off. Did I hear that wrong originally, or because that's what prompted me to suggest fish on that type of fund, but.
Sure, no, it's, well, our approach, Councilmember Marsh-Holshin, has been generally when you have enterprise funds, there's a portion of the enterprise fund. Generally, it's not out of general fund. A portion of the enterprise fund is set aside for subsidizing and assistance. It's not a oh my God moment kind of fund. And again, it gets kind of back to that point about with Council Member Cohen. That's why the consistent funding in Councilmember Ward, because the general fund is going to be subject to appropriation, and the general fund is going to be subject to needs and revenue and expenditures. Whereas if it's self-funded out of the enterprise fund and there is a certain percentage that is designated, then it becomes a self-funding assistance program, if you will.
And to follow up on Councilmember Cohen's question and Mr. Clark's answer, Broomfield has the second highest median income in the state county, but we had 15% of our population last year seek fish services. So that gives me great pause. So I like Councilmember Cohen's idea of a more discount based upon certain income levels, automatic discount off the top. You mentioned that it would be a staff heavy, but our human services already gathers data on a lot of individual. I mean, they get people that apply for SNAP or Medicaid or et cetera. Isn't there a way that those can be linked? So if somebody applies for SNAP, they're told, hey, apply for this discount. Would that kind of system ease the burden on the utility billing?
Yeah, I think the difference is that they're seeking, right? And we're open to that. But if we're going to do a blanket where we have to know, 1,500 household incomes, and we're trying to put that in the system somehow and then do a discount on top of that, that's where it gets administratively heavy. If they're seeking and coming to us, that's certainly something that we could take on.
It would be doable if they are applying for, if Mr. Casey and his department, gives, oh, you're applying for SNAP or you're applying for Medicaid, here's an application to apply for a discount or portion, whatever, off your water bill. That's more doable?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know. Question on just looking over the budget for next year. I know that's more conversation for Thursday night, but we were talking about the water, I'm just using water example, you're talking about $6 million a year for this asset management, but we have $15 million in the budget for CIP. Does that 6 million included in the 15? Is it in addition to it? Is that, I'm just kind of wondering where the numbers line up.
For the AECom recommendation, we started building that in 2026. So it is not included in our 2025 CIP request.
And I'm guessing the CIP projects are, what's in the 5-year CIP budget, for example, is everything we need to do. This is all just, does that include the asset management for future years? Or is it in addition, not just the numbers, but the actual projects? Is it in addition to it, or is it?
We have roughly about 2.3 million right now in water line replacement. And then there is some money set aside for water meter replacements because we have to replace the water meters every 10 years. And so we have a 10-year plan to replace the water meters. So that's in the CIP budget. There's some engineering costs and those type of things.
And then I guess my main question is, like everyone else up here, we hear the questions on why can't we do this more gradual? Why does it have to be such a huge increase all at once? And I completely understand the answer on the water and sewer. We have to bond those projects. We need the revenues to be able to bond. But why not the stormwater? That's not something, we don't have an enterprise set up for that right now currently, right?
That is correct. We do
Okay.
not have an.
And so I'm looking at the budget numbers, and the $11 per month cost seems to correlate to $6.6 million in the budget for 2025, but only 2.9 million in expenses. There's a 3.6 million in ending fund balance projected. So I guess the question is, why can't we continue, if we're going to spend 2.5 million out of the general fund, why can't we not do why can't we fund the expenses out of the stormwater out of the general fund this year? And then, gradually increase the fund. I guess why not do a $5 increase next year and then the full 11? Why not do that gradually? Because that's a big chunk of money.
Yeah, so right now, we're not even fully funding all the stormwater costs. And as we stand up an enterprise fund, which is pretty rare, we need that additional fund balance to start kind of so we'll have that much in revenue, we'll have expenditures, but as we stand it up, we can't just have a negative amount in there. And so the idea is that we're going to shift expenses from sewer and water over time into that and cover all of it. So, I mean, really the stormwater fund should probably be more like $14 or $15 if we were going to do all of it up front. But it is a little bit more gradual and starting at 11, and then it'll go up after that as we start shifting expenses into that new stormwater fund.
I get that. I guess my question is more, we have to raise the water and the sewer rates because of the upcoming big projects. Why can't we do the stormwater more gradually? And if we need to fund it out of general fund, out of the property taxes, we can do that. Just like we were talking about the $5. I agree with Councilman Cohen. I don't think the $5 is that meaningful of a thing. But the $11 for the stormwater seems to be it's more of a chunk. So why not do that? Why not do $11 over the course of 3 years? I guess is my question.
So let me take a shot at this, Grant. So part of the reason we are where we are right now is that shifting into what account has the black. So we've consistently looked at the bottom line to be able to say, these are not self-funded enterprise funds. So we have consistently taken whatever fund had black at the end of the year and transferred those dollars over. Over the last 12 years, there is no more money in the black in order to transfer over. So when we're looking at the stormwater, sewer primarily has been the funder of the stormwater. So even if we begin to shore up and have a sustainable sewer line, if we continue to have reliance, whether it's on the general fund or another enterprise fund, we're going to have this same conversation next year and the next year and the next year. So-
I understand that. and I'm
Yeah.
gonna Use my 15 seconds last to just make a statement. I think that we should do that, but I think in this particular case, because the residents are being asked to hit such a huge increase, it would make more sense to ease where we could, and that seems to be someplace that I think we can ease, knowing that we're doing it, I guess is my thought. Like, we know we're doing it, we're planning it, but it's gonna be a gradual, so it's kind of my thought.
We appreciate that. And when we're looking at the next 5 years, so we know that, so the 15% increase next year is based on the increase this year. So that 15% is not going to be 15% next year. That 15% is going to be higher based on whatever that additional smoothing is for stormwater. While at the same time, when we're having these 152 ponds after we get the auditor done saying this is what needs to happen at those, again, the end result is from the policy discussions, our communication with the residents to be able to say those 6 hot ponds that are 250,000 per pond, we only have enough budget for 2 of those ponds. And then again, it's that push, it's the pushing. So smoothing means you are pushing projects. There's no way around that. And at some point, the 15% increase then becomes something that is unreliable because you don't know what those amounts are going to be in the subsequent years. So then we become back to this volatility of it may be 26%. Because the maintenance of those ponds or the drainage or the runoff is now exponentially larger because those have failed and it's more expensive to do what we needed to do 4 years ago. Essentially, Councilmember Marsh-Holston, I mean, staff will follow the direction, but that planning is exactly why we are where we are.
One more thing to note is that if we took a less gradual, or we took a more gradual approach for stormwater, then we would move those expenditures back into the sewer fund, and the sewer fund would then need higher rate increases than what it is currently.
My time has expired. Can I make one statement?
All right, thank you. Councilmember Leslie.
Thank you, Mayor. This is really a question for AECom. We've heard and you've said that if we do nothing, there are consequences. We've heard that part of the reason we're where we are is because we didn't do enough over a period of time, and so it's caught up to us at this point. But as we make these investments, it would seem to me that there would be an organic kind of leveling because we're no longer catching up. We're now at a point where we're, quote, on top of it. And the cost of maintaining that is like the flywheel, right? We have to put all that energy in the beginning to get that wheel moving. But once it's caught, and as inertia starts to slow it a bit, then you just have to give it a nudge. And so at some point, we should be at that nudge stage where we're not going to have to see such dramatic costs. On the other hand, as the interchange just said, if we don't do enough, there's going to be greater costs because we're still allowing risk to drive so much of what happens. And I think Mr. Rudd and others have given good examples of that. But from your experience, and you've worked with so many other organizations, municipalities, et cetera, in this, what's your projection in terms of what I'm saying? Am I being accurate in that? And if so, what would you project over time would be the benefit of, that's what I'm looking for, is the benefit of this.
You're being accurate. That's one. 2, measuring the backlog is the index that we're using to determine the extent to which we are catching up and have caught up. We only took the analysis out 20 years, and we're seeing that another 2 million a year makes a big difference in terms of pulling the backlog down. What this suggests is it makes sense to stretch out the analysis a bit, see what happens downstream. It's easy to do. We can run an analysis in 10 or 15 seconds, stretch it out to 30 or 40 or 50 years and see what happens. makes sense to
Because
do.
it seems to me that, again, what we saw in terms of where our rates will be vis-à-vis our peer municipalities, we're not out of line. It's a big jump, but we're not out of line. And that it would seem to me that making this investment, taking action is really what I'm talking about here. That the positive thing is that we're taking action. That if we weren't taking action, that this would get worse, progressively worse. We would be subcontracting with private companies to fix the pipes and all that kind of stuff. So where I'm trying to go with this is that it seems to me that this is exactly what we need to do. How we refine it, and there's some good ideas being certainly suggested, but I'm just kind of in a place where I think we need to take credit for the discovery that we have these issues that have not been dealt with and that we're going to take action. And I know that folks are going to be upset, are upset, because so many things are increasing in costs, but what alternative do we have? We could take a little bit off the top, we could put a little bit on the bottom, but that's it. But if we do nothing, there's going to be some major consequences. So I'm kind of in the mode of saying, thank you, leadership and staff, for doing this. Thank you for helping us really identify the real costs of this thing. And I appreciate the kind of comparison with the previous study that was done. And you're right. I mean, I've been through this myself in many organizations, large organizations, and often these are the things that are not dealt with until the crisis erupts, and then suddenly you got to deal with it. And I appreciate the fact that the city manager is moving us deliberately towards addressing this issue. But it would seem to me that overall, our cost structure is going to actually decline vis-a-vis our peers once we get on top of where we need to be. And so I think in time, whatever that may be, we're going to be in a much better position than we are now, and if we do nothing. And I'm hearing you affirm that. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentations tonight. Thank you for the slides. I went through all 50-some slides today through AECom, and really appreciate staff's forward motion in this and helping us also take this head on as a team. And I really feel, you know, in the past, to echo what other city council members have said, that we have always voted for increases. So when staff came to us, we said, okay, we understand. And I'm not seeing this as being any different. And in fact, a lot of people in the community are supportive of it because they realize the need for it. I will say, you know, there are times where we really need to be forward thinking and have more even sort of public oversight on this. And not only from a city council view, but, you know, questions like Jan had and questions like other people had. I didn't disagree with them. I mean, John Ewalt was up here, and that's the first time I've ever tracked with John Ewalt. And I'll be quite honest, I feel like there's a lot of questions here that still need to be answered. I don't think we're going to answer all of them tonight. However, I do have a few questions for us, sort of higher level and then sort of in the nitty gritty. I have been in and out. I apologize. My son's out of state. He's had a medical emergency tonight, so I came back in. So I apologize if there's any questions that I've repeated. And if you want to, just give me the Cliff's Notes real quick. So I appreciate that. My first question is just really general and sort of oversight. So I belong to different boards. You know, I probably belong to like 5 or 6 different boards, and I have for over 10 years now. There are other counties that have a board that oversees water. Why don't we have a board that oversees our water issues? And what would be any hesitation to that? Because I feel like we should have some sort of, we're hearing over and over tonight that we really need AECom to come in and help us with this and our asset management and things like that. And I want to say that I wouldn't have a problem. I mean, we have a Parks and Rec board. I would think that a board overseeing our water oversight would assist our staff as well. And assist this process along to have some sort of more public oversight. So is there a reason why we have not had a board like other counties do?
No, there isn't. And in fact, part of the conversation from a forward-looking perspective, the conversations with the mayor and mayor pro tem, when we're talking about the council focus work session, as we start looking about the future, some municipalities are entertaining having a water authority, where much like the Board of Health, where it is an independent board. They have independent studies done. It's consistent, it's uniform. And it takes, I don't want to say the impetus, but you have resident experts. So again, when we're talking about a community board, you're not gonna have the fundamental resident experts. You're gonna continue to have third-party AECOMs, Wildan studies done versus a water authority, which is you have a board of individuals that is what they do. To come up with the rates and the studies and automated and repeatable. So again, I think it's certainly worthy of the conversation. And it depends on what council's looking for versus adding another kind of the boards and commissions, which is the community section versus this water it's complex. And it's not really a once a month where we say, hey, here's where we are. I mean, it's much more technical than that. I mean, we have, between the team in Public Works and from the budget perspective, probably 22 people that do nothing but this.
Yeah.
So again, part from a staff perspective to say water authority, heck yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is what that transition looks like.
Okay. I would like to see some sort of, process where we are incorporating someone or a group that has more oversight, and then also someone has more specialty like you all have. I mean, you guys have brought to light a lot of things that we haven't assessed before. So I would love it if staff can kind of just mull that over. And Broomfield's always original. We've always done everything sort of in a hybrid-like manner. So we're a city and a county. We have to realize that. And maybe something might work for another city or something might work for another county, but we have to find the best fit for Broomfield. So thank you. My second question is just a little bit, I'm trying to understand the priority score. I was a biology major and we always showed what sort of variables were involved in possibly something like this. So I'm curious as to if you guys have any sort of means by what you're showing in that priority score. And I don't know if you can show that slide again. That would be helpful, I think, for me to see. What are we taking into account for? Is any of that information proprietary? So is there something that you either are or are not able to share according to your lawyers, or what does that look like?
One, it's not proprietary.
Okay.
The 4 factors, age and condition, risk, what we call benefit cost, which is basically looking at how much more expensive an old asset is to operate than a new asset, and the strategic goals score. The first 3 rely on a set of asset deterioration curves. Those curves are the product of a lot of research done. Much of it comes out of the public transportation industry, what we've been using, specialized curves for some water assets. And there's 3 sets of curves. There's an age versus condition curve, which is pretty self-explanatory. There's an age versus reliability curve that we use in that risk rating. And there's an age versus operating cost curve, which we use in the benefit cost ratio score. In our experience, not enough research has been broadly published in this area, but there's information out there, and the EPA, for example, has been doing some work in this area, and various universities have been doing some work. I think it's certainly an area where we can refine the analysis that's been done so far. Does that answer the question for you.
A little bit, like, you know, when you talk about age and condition and performance, are we taking into consideration possibly any sort of modernization of materials? So, you know, we
No.
used to use certain types of pipes. Now we don't anymore. And or like I was listening to you talking about heat mapping. I mentioned that last week actually in our budget meeting when we talk about AI, like how are we using technology when we're kind of predicting the future? Usually if we have something that has better materials, is that taken into consideration for risk?
Not so far, but it's certainly something that we could do. So we could look at, you know, for example, you know, replacing old pipe with new pipe, reasonable to expect the decay curve has a different shape. Generally, we would expect that the assets would age more gracefully. Newer assets would and modern technology assets would age more gracefully than older assets. That type of refinement is certainly something that we could include in the analysis downstream.
Okay. I would like to see some more of the analysis. I kind of get a little nerdy about those sorts of things.
Yeah.
What went into it, and what sort of variables.
We have some off-the-shelf slides that we could provide that show the various decay curves, for example, that we're applying.
Okay, yeah, I would like to know what
Okay.
went into all of that. And then how often would be manageable to revisit or visit? I'm very thankful for the idea to have this being, our water issues just sort of presented to us with every quarter or so, along with our public safety. I feel like water is going to be gold if it isn't already. I took a water law class for about 2 hours. I wanted to gouge my eyes out. It was really difficult. So this is not something that's very easy to do, but I would like to see an answer as to how often we're coming back to you. And then my last question is the debt payments on slide 9. Ken, you had presented that, and there was a huge jump from one year to the next. And I apologize. I think it went from 2 million maybe to 11 million if my brain is working right. And that's my last question. Thank you. Again, slide number 9, debt payments.
Yeah, that debt payment would be for the wastewater expansion.
Between 226 and 227, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all I have for tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I just have 2 additional questions beyond all this. There's been a lot of great questions tonight. We've had some questions from residents who, and I just want to clarify if this is correct and if they are exempt. Are there residents in Broomfield that do not receive sewer service? And then if not, then are they exempt from that charge? Which just wouldn't appear on their bill?
Yes, there are some that have septic tanks on their property, and if they don't already get sewer service, like we've got several, and I don't know the exact number of how many folks do have septic sewer, but we would not be adding a sewer charge if they don't already get one.
Okay, that's helpful. And then are there any properties that are exempt from the stormwater charge? And one question was asked about irrigation ditches, but are you exempt from, would that also be included in the stormwater costs, or would that also be exempt?
If they're not sure about the irrigation ditches, I'm not sure what type of accounts those would be. It would be single family would have a stormwater fee.
Okay, do you think that most
Most of them would have a stormwater fee. There may be a few exceptions out there that have irrigation only and they don't have any impervious area. And we'd have to look at that on a one-off basis.
Okay, thank you. And then the only other question I have, because we've been so focused on like the single family, the residential. And then has there been any consideration, we talked about really briefly, back in July, but the reuse water, has there been any recent analysis on reuse water increases, or has that been kind of out of the conversation recently?
We focused on water and wastewater this year primarily. We did not look at reuse as much, and therefore there's not a rate increase for reuse this year. However, we'll be looking at it in more detail next year.
Okay, and that is helpful. And then on non-residential, the only note that I could find was that for the wastewater was, I'm sorry, the stormwater was that it was charged based on impervious square footage. Is that, how does that, I mean, and then also there was no, are there base fee increases to other tap sizes for non-residential? Or are those not going up is that going to be considered in the future year?
Depending on what size you have, the commercial class will also have an increase in the base fee.
Okay. And that is, I think that's, yeah, and do you have an example of this impervious square footage? Like what would that stormwater fee look like from a non-residential property?
Yeah, so let's, for instance, take like a Safeway, a grocery store that has 800 square feet of impervious area. That's roof space and parking lot. And so through our GIS system, we're able to know how much that is. And we would take the impervious footage times a base rate, which is roughly $2 a square foot. And I think we did a calculation on the Safeway, and I think it was like, do you remember, Byron, $88 or something like that for a larger grocery store?
Okay, so not terribly significant.
Right.
Okay, all right. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Chef.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple quick questions. Looking at the maturity review and gap summary slide that AECom presented, there were different levels, and I was curious if the levels that we have, kind of that 6 million on water, 8 to 10 million on sewer, does that get us to that competent level, or is there any association between that investment?
So the gap analysis is looking at different things than the CIP model. So we're looking at the business processes that are in place. Do you have on the data, do you have deterioration curves in place? Do you have a data dictionary, which is basically saying what are all the pieces of your data that you're collecting? Now, could it correlate to some extent? Because the higher you score there, that means the more mature your model is going to be, and the more granular information that can be put into the model, and it just becomes better. Then yes, you could have that, but it's not a one-for-one type comparison.
Okay, I appreciate that information. You mentioned and this is more of a question for staff. You had mentioned and I'm just pulling it up, just make sure I have it, which was the CCOB radar chart. On there, under organization, one of the low rated areas was around the training and education. And I'm curious with the asset system, there's of course the nuts and bolts in the capital, but we also have the resource side and operations of this system being people. What is the plan to elevate the training and management of the people of the enterprise system to ensure that we carry that along as well as with the rest of the infrastructure of the enterprise system?
Sure, appreciate that, Mayor Pro Tem. And it gets to the succession planning, because if you don't have the skill set in order to understand the data, you're not going to be able to fulfill that obligation. Mr. Rutt, talk a little bit about our conversations thus far of how we're going to level up on that.
Yeah, so a couple items is one thing on the training. Our philosophy in Public Works is I don't just train the managers, we train the entire Public Works. So that's part of the succession planning, is making sure that from the top to the newest employee, that we begin to train and provide them with the institutional knowledge and background. And we do that not only just in verbal trainings, but also through our development of our policies and procedures, our SOPs of how to perform a certain task, to the business models and outlining the duties and responsibilities. So all of those pieces play into how we ensure that we are taking the institutional knowledge and making sure it's translating down to the newest employee. As far as asset management goes, in addition, we are working to finalize a date with AECom, and we believe that's going to be in November, hopefully. 14th, I think it is, or somewhere in that area, where they're going to come in and do a full day training for Public Works. And so we will be taking our staff through the process of asset management and to help, again, translate all that institutional knowledge down to the folks that are actually doing the job. I think one of the benefits that we've had during this whole process is that staff has gained the awareness of how critical proper documentation is. And that is, how much staff time am I taking to do a particular task? What parts are included in that task? When do we need to order? How long does it take to get that order placed? All of those pieces of operations and making sure that all that information is translated.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And the last thing that I have is I appreciate the proposal for 2025 to utilize general funds to offset those enterprise funds. Of course, needing to reevaluate that in 2026. We don't know where we'll be at that point, but I do appreciate the proposal for that, and I like to see that come forward. That's all I have. Thank you so much, staff. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. And so that concludes our first round of questions from council. I want to thank you all too. This has been very enlightening and helpful to see it broken down. I've learned a lot. So we will go to second round questions with council, and you have 2 minutes, starting with Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just a procedural question for Ms. Rogers, and I'm going to rephrase the question that Councilmember Lim had asked you. So since this is not going to be part of the October 1st or whatever date the first reading of the budget is, it has to be an amendment on second reading, and our current rules and procedures require that if there's a substantial amendment on an ordinance, we have to go to a third reading. Is that going to be the case here?
No.
Okay.
So October 1st is a required public hearing of the proposed budget at that time. October 22nd is a resolution approving the budget. That can be amended, and that's outside of your council rules. But I think Councilmember Lim, to your point, that's an important distinction, and depending on council's direction at this meeting, we should be ready to explain that to the public on the 1st. But the budget could have modifications before it comes back on the 22nd.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that procedural issue.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Lim.
I have a question on slide 8 of the staff presentation, if you can bring that up, but I have other two quick questions that I want to ask in the meantime. I had some resident questions ask about why are we dependent on Denver water if it's more expensive?
It is more expensive. The contract we have with Denver Water dates originally, I don't remember the original date, but this current one, I believe, dates into the 1990s with our current water supply at the time. It does currently supply 39.47% of our daily water use currently. It is part of our long-range water plan to include the amount of water that we get from Denver Water. So as Broomfield continues to grow, that percentage of Denver Water will drop as the percent of our water will increase. But Denver Water is has been and always has been part of the long-range water plan for the city and county of Broomfield. We are under contract to take for 4,700 acre feet, whether we use 1 gallon or we use all 4,700 acre feet. It costs us the same amount of money.
Okay. My question regarding slide 8 is in the debt payment line, is the group debt that we're taking on for Chimney Hollow reflected in the debt payment line?
Let me add one more thing to your previous question. One of the critical pieces of water supply is you want to ensure that you have some variability in where your supply comes from. So Northern Water is out of the headwaters of the Colorado River. Denver Water has multiple sources available. So what it also provides is some additional drought protection, because as we know, certain areas of the mountains get snow some years, certain other years don't. So the Denver Water does provide us some additional security for our water supply.
Thank you.
The debt payments listed on here are 8.7 million. That's the existing Windy Gap. So the $857,000 is not on that particular slide.
Okay. So, but that 157,000 is part of our expenses that are factored into what our revenue needs to be, correct?
That's correct.
Should it be reflected that group debt? I mean, should it be reflected somehow?
It is reflected. I'm not sure if it's under O&M or if it's the additional amount of the, yeah, it's in the CIP right now. Once we fully agree to it with the group, it'll then be under kind of the debt payment category. But right now it's in the CIP.
Okay, okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? All right, well, that concludes our questions. I want to thank you all again for hanging in there and our residents for showing up and staying engaged and asking wonderful questions. So more to come. This is just our study session. Now, do you have enough direction on the $5 discount option?
No.
I didn't think so. Should we, is there anyone that really wants to move forward with that, or do you feel like we need to take a poll?
A poll would be great.
All right. Can we use the agenda link? I can pose a question. Okay. If you're in favor of moving forward with the $5 discount option, subject to annual appropriations, go ahead and vote yes once it's ready. And if you'd rather not, vote no. Thank you, Patrick. One moment, please. Kind of sprung it on you. I did spring it on you. I'm sorry. Good for the record. Okay, will the clerk please call the roll? Haven't said that in a while.
Anderson,
Yes.
Cohen,
No.
Delgadillo,
No.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Leslie,
Yes.
Lim,
Yes.
Marshallson. No. Win,
No.
Schaff,
Yes.
Ward.
No.
Oh, that's a tie. No, I think we need to have more surety, and I really don't think that's going to make a difference. So I'm a no. All right, that concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Is there any other business to come before the council from my colleagues or staff? There being no further business, the study session is adjourned. Council will now move into executive session in a few minutes.